Chapter 237. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind I Am Hollywood. Listen to more of your suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account. Add friends on WeChat. Add official account. Type Dread. And tell me quietly. I didn't expect you to be so resourceful. But there is one thing. Why is everyone an idiot? And you are the only one who is still wise and powerful. Another morning in Eric's room, Elizabeth sat on a chair next to the small wooden table and looked at Eric, who was brushing his teeth in the bathroom. I'm the director, the one in control of the entire crew. I'm like the alpha wolf of a pack of wolves. Eric rinsed his mouth and wiped the foam from the corner of his mouth. He continued. If I make a mistake, doesn't that mean all of you are wrong? You are really good at quibbling. Elizabeth curled her lips in dissatisfaction. Seeing Eric come out, the girl pointed to the breakfast on the tray in front of her and said, Here for you. Eric did not hesitate. He pulled the tray directly in front of him and quickly ate. He knew that Elizabeth must have already eaten. According to the girl herself, she was on a diet. During this time, she only ate an apple and a glass of milk for breakfast. But in Eric's view, it must be because Elizabeth couldn't stand the sanitary conditions here, and she couldn't find a place to make breakfast, so she had to eat something simple. And the girl also ate very little for the other 2 meals. Looking at Eric, who began to wolf down his food, the girl helplessly picked up the document in front of her, read today's shooting schedule and other things to Eric, and reminded him of some things that Eric needed to allocate extra time to deal with. These were originally Alan's work, but since Elizabeth insisted on coming, Eric naturally assigned this part of the work to her. And at the same time, she could also take care of her eyes every morning. Although she was also aware of Eric's dirty thoughts, Elizabeth did not refuse. By the way, I think you must read this newspaper. What? Eric put down the glass and took the newspaper. This was the Seattle Times, one of the largest newspapers in Washington state. Of course, this was not what Eric cared about. At this time, he was paying attention to the headline on the front page of the newspaper. Sony acquires Columbia Pictures for $5 billion. Although Eric knew that Sony would complete the acquisition in September, and he was worried about the future distribution of Dark War after the Japanese acquired Columbia, he did not want to worry about it. After Eric carefully read the article, he let out a sigh of relief. He put the newspaper aside and continued to eat breakfast. He saw a piece of news in the article. Under the pressure of public opinion, the Japanese announced that Sony will not be involved in the management of Columbia Pictures. The company will still be managed by the American management team, and Sony will only be an investor. Since nothing would change, there would be no setbacks in the future distribution of Dark War. Elizabeth stared at Eric for a while before she couldn't help but ask, Are you feeling quite proud now? Eric swallowed the food in his mouth and looked up in confusion. What do I have to be proud of? Oh, I didn't expect you to be humble. The girl curled her lips. Or maybe you didn't read the analysis in the 4th paragraph of the article. Because Home Alone and Dark War pushed up Columbia's stock price, the Japanese paid at least $700 million. That's $700 million. Isn't that enough to make you proud? Eric shrugged. Of course I'm proud, but it's not enough to make me jump up in joy. After all, the Japanese did not transfer the $700 million to my card. What about Dark War? I heard about the contract. Firefly did not invest a single cent, but they got more than half of the box office profits. Why are you looking at me like I got a bargain? Although I got more than half of the profits, Columbia also made money. Speaking of this, Eric pretended to be angry and said, And you just said that the Japanese paid an extra $700 million for this. If that's the case, I lost money. On average, I let the Columbia shareholders earn an extra $350 million per movie, but they won't give me a single cent. The girl was shocked by Eric's logic and opened her mouth slightly. After a while she said, You're really? Okay, that's not what you should worry about now. Eric finished his breakfast and wiped his mouth with a napkin. The most important thing now is to make this movie well. Now that you mention it, I'm reminded of something. The girl looked up at Eric, who was walking to the closet to get his clothes. I've read the script these days, and I think this movie is very strange. Very strange. Eric turned his head and glanced at the girl. Elizabeth nodded. That's right. Don't you think it's a little too far-fetched for two strangers to start worrying about each other before they even see each other? And for the other to act as if they've just reunited after a long time? I don't think so. Eric put on his coat and said, Liz, have you heard of fate? Predestined relationship. The girl repeated the phrase that Eric translated after pondering for a while. Then she shook her head and said, I don't think it's possible. How can there be a predestined relationship in this world? Everything has already happened and can't be changed. It's all predestined, which is the so-called fate. Just like me and you, me and Jenny, me and Drew, me and Vicky. Elizabeth rolled her eyes and said, Why do I have the urge to beat you up when I hear you say that? Also, don't put me in the same category as other women, okay? Eric smiled and said, Okay, I'm just kidding. Actually, in the distant east, there's a very romantic view. It's called looking back 500 times in the past life in exchange for a passing encounter in this life. What do you mean? Elizabeth asked. It's a long story. Eric looked at his watch and said, Everyone must have already set off. Let's go too. We'll talk on the way. This small hotel was less than a kilometer away from the seaside cabin used by the crew for filming, so everyone walked there. After greeting the others, the two walked side by side on the street. Elizabeth said, Go on. Eric nodded and said, There's a view in Eastern Buddhism that life will not be annihilated. Their souls will be reincarnated repeatedly, so there's a past life and this life. So think about it again, you should understand, right? Looking back 500 times in the past life in exchange for a passing encounter in this life. Elizabeth murmured and repeated this sentence. Then she looked at Eric and said, Isn't that too tiring? Follow the Chinese network's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Kdred, and participate immediately. Everyone has a prize. Follow Kdred's official account on WeChat now. Chapter 238. What? This time, it was Eric's turn to be confused. Why, Elizabeth repeated. Wouldn't it be too tiring to look back 500 times in exchange for passing each other by once? Eric was speechless. Does this girl have no romantic cells, or is she too serious? However, he still went along with the girl's words and said, So since it's so tiring, then we should cherish the fact that we can meet in this life, right? Oh. Why, Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully, then asked, But what you said doesn't seem to have much to do with Sleepless in Seattle, right? How is it unrelated? Sleepless in Seattle is a story about fate. A man and a woman separated by thousands of miles finally came together through a radio program. Isn't that fate? Why, Elizabeth was unconvinced. But I think your story is impossible in reality. You're too absolute. There are billions of people in this world. Any strange coincidence can happen. Also, if it's so easy to happen, then why would I make a movie? Eric spread his hands. It's because there are too many impossibilities in reality that stories appear in all kinds of media. For example, movies are just to give people some kind of mental compensation and comfort. This is where the beauty of stories lies. Okay, you always have a lot of reasons. Why, Elizabeth realized that she couldn't argue with Eric, so she gave up. On New Year's Eve, the father and son still spent the night alone in the house without any lights on. After Jonah fell asleep, Sam carried his son into the bedroom and went to the deck alone. Looking at the rising fireworks in the distance, the loneliness in his heart grew even stronger. He fled to the living room in a panic and lay on the sofa. After drinking some beer, he finally fell asleep. Unknowingly, he saw his wife, Maggie, appear again. The woman with short hair, wearing a white dress, and a tall figure with a delicate face. Can I drink half a can of beer? Maggie took Sam's half-drunk can of beer and sat down next to him. She leaned against the sofa and looked at Sam with a charming smile on her face. Sam also looked at her in a daze. Maggie said again, What did I say before? What do you mean? Sam finally reacted and asked subconsciously. I said, I respect your eyes. Sam shook his head. To us. The two of them looked at each other for a moment before Sam finally said in pain, Baby, I miss you so much that my heart hurts. Card good, Eric shouted with satisfaction. The woman sitting on the sofa also stood up and came to Eric. Revealing a charming smile, she asked, "Director Williams, how was my performance?" "Of course you're outstanding, Ms. Lowe," Eric said to the tall lady. The girl's name was Kelly Lowe, who happened to be the Bond girl in this year's latest movie, James Bond, License to Kill. In the original Space-Time, the role of Sam's wife in Sleepless in Seattle was played by this woman. In this case, she was more famous now than she would be a few years later, so Eric asked someone to invite her. Kelly Lowe also responded quickly, saying that she was very willing to play a guest role in Eric's movie. This was also very understandable. Although she was the latest Bond girl, this year's 007, License to Kill, only received 30 million yuan at the box office when it was released this summer. If it was any other movie, 30 million yuan at the box office would definitely be good, but this was 007. 30 million yuan was too embarrassing to say hello to others. Not to mention that the film's publicity cost was far more than 30 million yuan. Although through the worldwide distribution, MGM not only recovered the cost but also made a small profit. However, the score of 30 million in North America directly led to the 007 series, which had been produced on a biannual basis, being suspended for 6 years by MGM. When it was restarted, all the main creators had been replaced. Because the movie's results were not satisfactory, Kelly Lowe did not gain the corresponding fame because of it. To be honest, the Bond girls in the 007 series had never gained much fame. It was easy to think of Sean Connery, Pierce Brosnan, or Daniel Craig, who had played 007, but not many people could name a few of the Bond girls. "Do you want me to do it again? Do you want me to pass it just like that?" Kelly Lowe asked when she heard Eric's words. She had very few scenes. Other than in Sam's dream, she only appeared for a few seconds when she was shopping with her family. All the scenes added up to less than a minute in the entire movie. Kelly Lowe was born in 1961 and was already 28 years old. If she didn't make a big breakthrough in her acting career, she wouldn't be able to make much progress in her acting career after the age of 30. Therefore, since she was able to act in Eric's movie, she had made up her mind to try her best to get more screen time for herself. Kelly Lowe was 28 years old and was also born in 1961. She was 28 years old this year. If she didn't make a big breakthrough in her acting career, she wouldn't be able to make much progress in her acting career after she was 30 years old. When she agreed to be a guest star, Kelly Lowe did not even ask for a penny. It was not hard to imagine what she was thinking. Although it was only a guest star, except for Eric himself, who knew the specific situation, no one would underestimate this role. Originally, many people had recommended Eric, but they were all rejected by Eric. Instead, he directly asked for Kelly Lowe's name. The girl also cherished it very much. After all, although Brooke Shiaosi was the nominal female lead in Dark War, her appearance time was almost the same as a guest star. Therefore, Kelly Lowe also hoped that Sleepless in Seattle could bring about the same effect as Brooke Shiaosi in Dark War. But Eric shook his head. "No need, Ms. Lowe. It's a bit late now, so you can go back to the city. I'm sure you know that the living conditions of the crew here are not very good. It's okay. I'll wait for a while. Anyway, it's almost over. Maybe they need me somewhere." "Okay." Eric nodded and the girl sensibly walked to the side. The scene continued. The scene was still on the sofa. Sam opened his eyes and woke up, only to find that everything was just a dream. He rubbed his eyes and looked around. The dim light and the silence seemed to set off his lonely mood at the moment. "Okay, Hanks, that's it for today." After Eric finished speaking, he said to the crew, "Everyone, pack up and go back to rest as soon as possible. We're going to the Seattle airport tomorrow." Chapter 239. After returning to the hotel where the crew was staying, Eric took a shower and was lying on the bed, talking on the phone with Jennifer Aniston, who was far away in Los Angeles. Someone knocked on the door. Eric answered and hurriedly said to Jennifer Aniston on the other side, "Baby, someone's at the door." "I'll hang up first." "How is that possible?" "It's probably someone from the crew who wants to discuss something with me." "Silly girl. Don't think I don't know. You asked Nicole to spy on me, didn't you?" "Haha. She's staying next door now. In this shitty hotel. She can hear me even if I talk a little louder. How would I dare? Okay, kiss bye. After putting down the microphone, Eric put on his slippers and opened the door. Kelly Lowy was standing at the door in a khaki windbreaker. Her delicate face had been carefully dressed up, and she looked even colder than when she was playing Sam's wife Maggie on the set. Her high-collared windbreaker was unbuttoned, and her snow-white clothes made people want to tear it open. Her slender calves in black stockings were exposed under the windbreaker, and the black leather boots on her feet made her look more youthful and energetic. The girl was also holding a blue folder in her hand. Seeing Eric's stunned expression, Kelly Lowy's eyes flashed with pride. Mr. Williams, may I come in? Oh, of course. Eric finally reacted. He let Kelly Lowy in with a smile and closed the door behind her. Eric walked to the combination cabinet where the old-fashioned TV was placed, opened a small compartment and asked casually, "The conditions here are limited. There's only milk and orange juice. Miss Lowy, which one do you want?" Kelly Lowy sat down on the chair beside the round table and put the blue folder on the table. Hearing Eric's question, her expression changed slightly and she said, "If possible, give me a glass of milk." Eric didn't think much of it. He poured a glass of milk for the girl and gave it to her. At the same time, he sat down on the other side of the round table. Kelly Lowell thanked him softly. She picked up the glass of milk and brought it to her lips casually, but her blue eyes stared at Eric with a hint of charm. Eric couldn't help but rub his nose as he looked at the girl's suggestive actions in the quiet room in the dead of night. He asked, "Miss Lowe, shouldn't you be back in the city? You don't have any more scenes here." The woman looked at Eric with a hint of resentment and said, "Do you want me to leave? It's already so late. Even if I go to the city, I won't be able to find a hotel. Besides, I'm a woman and I don't dare to run around so late at night." Kelly Lowe was obviously talking nonsense. Eric had seen with his own eyes that she had an assistant with her. Besides, if she was worried about her own safety, all she had to do was tell the crew and they would definitely send her to downtown Seattle. However, Eric didn't expose her. At first sight, Eric could almost guess her intentions. "All right. What do you want?" Eric asked straightforwardly. Kelly Lowe opened the blue folder in front of her and said, "Actually, Mr. Williams, I want to talk to you about my role." Eric took a few pages of A4 paper from the woman. He glanced at it and understood that it was about her understanding and thoughts on the role of Maggie. Many actors would do similar work after they accepted the role. Eric did not expect that she would do such a character analysis for such a small role. After reading it, Eric found that the analysis was even more thorough about Maggie than he was. There were some details that even he didn't think of. He raised his head in surprise and asked, "Miss Luaway, did you do this yourself?" Kelly Lowe's lips moved. After a moment of hesitation, she said honestly, "My agent and I discussed it together. Eric, what do you think?" "Your agent is not bad," Eric said with a smile. Seeing the awkward expression in the woman's eyes, Eric did not dwell on the question. He continued, "The analysis of Maggie is very accurate. To be honest, there are some details that even I didn't think of. Maggie is indeed the fuse of the whole story. Without this character, there wouldn't be a foundation for the development of the whole story." Then, Kelly Lowe leaned forward in surprise after hearing Eric's approval. "Mr. Williams, don't you think that Maggie has too few scenes? Since this role is so important, it should be reasonable to add a few more scenes, right? Miss Lowe, you have to understand that the focus of this story is Sam and Anne. I hope that after the movie is released in the future, the audience can have a strong resonance with the wonderful fate between the male and female leads. Only then can this movie be successful." Kelly Lowe was not discouraged at all after hearing Eric's words. She stared at Eric with her bright blue eyes and leaned forward again. She said softly, "Mr. Williams, I don't mean to steal the female lead's limelight. Also, with your talent, you definitely won't let that happen, right? I just hope that you can add a few more scenes for Maggie." Eric's lips curled into a faint smile, but he still shook his head lightly. He didn't seem to have any intention of agreeing at all. Kelly Lowe, who felt Eric's gaze, stiffened for a moment. However, her expression soon became more charming. She thought that Eric was just waiting for the right price. Mr. Williams, does that mean you agree? Eric looked at the girl's long eyelashes that kept fluttering as she spoke. He asked with a smile, agree to what? Kelly Lowe was stunned, but she did not dare to show her impatience. Add a few more scenes for Maggie. Actually, you don't have to add too many scenes. As long as the audience can remember Maggie, that's enough. You can definitely do that, right? Of course that's easy. Just like Brooke Xiaoxi in Dark War. Eric nodded. Before the girl could show her surprise, Eric shook his head again and said firmly, but I can't do that. If the relationship between Sam and Maggie is too perfect, not only will it distract the audience, but it might also make the audience think that Sam has always been single. At the same time, they will be disgusted by the fate between Sam and Anne. That will be a disaster for the movie. Do you think I'll let my movie become a disaster because of one or two characters? Kelly Lowe looked at Eric. Seeing that he had no intention of relenting, she lowered her head in disappointment. Mr. Williams, if that's the case, then I'll go back. Why do you have to go back? Can't you talk for a while longer? Eric asked with a grin. Kelly Lowe insisted. Mr. Williams, I'd better go back. Eric lowered his voice and said patiently, why go back so late? Also, let me remind you, there are rats in this small hotel. These little things are very bold. They dare to climb on people in the middle of the night. Kelly Lowe shrunk her neck, but she still said immediately, I'm not afraid of rats, Mr. Williams. Then you're scared of me. That's really sad. Eric made a disappointed expression. No. The girl quickly shook her head. Then, as if she thought of something, she said, oh right, I have a boyfriend. So Mr. Williams, we can't do this. Eric put his hand over his heart. Wow, that's really a pity. Another beautiful girl is taken. I think all the men who know you will be heartbroken. Can I know who that lucky guy is? Kelly Lowe said, his name is Griffin Dunn. He's also an actor. He has already proposed to me. Eric searched his memory and found some images of Griffin Dunn in the movies in his memory. He was a man who looked similar to Robin Williams, but was much shorter than Robin Williams. He had played supporting roles in many movies and even directed a few movies, but he was not very famous. After thinking for a moment, Eric asked, did you say yes? Kelly Lowe shook her head, but Eric saw a trace of uncertainty in her eyes. She seemed to want to say yes. After a moment, Kelly Lowe said, I'm still thinking about it, but he has a lot of connections in Hollywood. Eric understood that the girl was referring to the more opportunities her career would have if she married Griffin Dunn. Looking at the elegant woman in front of him who was 1.75 meters tall, and thinking about that wretched fellow who was only 1.6 meters tall, Eric suddenly had the urge to save a flower. He blurted out, he can't help you. Kelly Lowe said in a slight panic, Mr. Williams, I don't know what you're talking about. The girl was obviously embarrassed that Eric had seen through her. You know. Eric smiled meaningfully. Also, I can tell you that he can't help you. The girl could no longer pretend. She could only raise her head and ask boldly, what makes you say that? What makes me say that? Based on my memory. Eric mumbled to himself. In his memory, Kelly Lowe did not have any other representative works except for showing her face in the 16007 movie. Since that was the case, the person she married probably did not help her much in her career at all. She had no choice but to become a housewife. Moreover, Eric remembered that he had read a theory somewhere. It was that men tended not to help their wives. Although this theory had not been proven, specific examples could be found everywhere. Moreover, from another point of view, husbands did not want their wives to be stronger than them. This was definitely a fact. Chapter 240. Of course, Eric couldn't tell the girl the truth. She wouldn't believe him even if he did. He could only analyze it based on the facts. I've heard of Griffin Dunn before. Although he's quite popular, he doesn't have any right to decide the actors. He can only recommend you and get more auditions than you can in your agency. However, I happened to watch 007 during the summer. To be honest, Ms. Lowe, your acting skills aren't good enough for you to seize those opportunities. That's why I said that he can't help you. Kelly Lowy lowered her head and fell silent. She seemed to be struggling. She even forgot that Eric was still holding her leg. After a while, the girl seemed to have thought something through. She looked up at Eric and asked boldly, "Then Mr. Williams, can you help me?" Eric shook his head without thinking. "I can't either." Kelly Lowy was the same age as Virginia. However, Virginia had acted in many movies and was even nominated for a Golden Globe. Therefore, her acting skills weren't bad at all. She just lacked opportunities. However, Kelly Lowy didn't have any acting skills. She couldn't do any other roles except for being a pretty face like in 007. If the girl were 10 years younger, Eric could spend some effort to train her. But now forget it. Then why are you? The girl suddenly remembered her current situation and said gloomily, "Mr. Williams, I'm leaving." Kelly Lowy was about to get up and leave after saying that. Eric's lips curled into an evil smile. He pushed the glass of milk towards the girl. "Finish this. It'll help you sleep." "Okay." Kelly Lowy nodded subconsciously and picked up the glass obediently as if she were possessed. Under Eric's intense gaze, the girl finished the milk in a hurry and put down the glass. "I'm going back to my room." "Okay." Eric didn't intend to stop her at all. He nodded at the girl from his chair. Kelly Lowe stood up and strode to the door, but her hand that was about to open the door became hesitant. She stood there for a few seconds without opening the door. Eric stood behind the woman and said, "Why don't you stay for a glass of milk? I have a lot here." "I want that." "No need." When the woman heard Eric speak, she felt Eric move closer to her. The morning sun shone through the wooden window into the corner of the room. Eric opened his eyes and looked at his watch. He then relaxed and stretched. Then he quickly realized that he wasn't in his room. He looked to the other side. Although there was a pillow, Kelly Lowy was nowhere to be seen. Eric thought that the girl had woken up, so he didn't think much of it. He put on his clothes and walked to his room. While washing up, Elizabeth walked in again. However, the girl's expression was gloomy. She did not greet Eric, nor did she sit down like she usually did. When Eric walked out, Elizabeth threw the memo on the small round table. "Here, look for yourself." Eric was stunned. Then he realized something and didn't care. He asked, "Well, where's my breakfast?" "I saw a few pitiful stray cats on the street, so I gave it to them." After saying that, the girl raised her chin proudly and walked out in her leather boots. Eric smiled and shook his head. He picked up the day's schedule and decided to buy some breakfast himself later. The door was soon pushed open again. The tall Nicole walked in and sat down next to Eric. She put a convenience bag in front of Eric. "Here, I think you might need this today." Eric could already smell the faint aroma of food. He smiled and said to the girl, "Nicole is still the best to me." Nicole crossed her legs and put her hands on her knees. She looked at Eric with interest. Then, "What should I tell Jenny? What should I tell her?" Eric finished reading the day's schedule and memo. He took out the food from the convenience bag and started eating. Nicole raised her eyebrows. "What do you think?" Eric quickly put on a look of sudden realization. "Wow, I didn't know you had the bad habit of eavesdropping. What did you hear last night?" The girl blushed and said, "Nothing. I just heard some nonsense." "Oh right. In the middle of the night, there was a big rat running around in the hallway." "That's nothing. Just tell Jenny the truth." Eric looked indifferent. Nicole was just joking with Eric. She didn't dare to use that against Eric. Hearing Eric say that, she could only smile. "By the way, did you see Miss Kelly Lowe?" Eric suddenly asked while eating breakfast. Nicole seemed to have thought of something interesting. She smiled and said, "I saw her, but she probably didn't want to stay and be teased, so she left in a hurry early in the morning." "Seriously, what did you promise her this time? Why were you so crazy last night?" Eric shrugged. "There's nothing. It's a matter of mutual consent. It's just a normal ONS." Nicole smiled in surprise and said, "In that case, I think that poor woman must have been coaxed by you." Eric glared at the girl. Chewing the food in his mouth, he mumbled, "That's slander. Be careful, or I'll sue you for slander." After breakfast, the shooting of Sleepless in Seattle continued. Today's main scene was about Jonah's girlfriend who liked to use abbreviations. In order to go to New York to find Anne, Jonah bought a ticket to New York with the help of his girlfriend, Jessica. Jonah's father, Sam, quickly found out. The anxious Sam searched everywhere for Jonah like a madman. In the end, he followed his son's footsteps and flew to New York. After everything was ready, the scene board was set down and all the filming equipment started. Eric sat behind the monitor and watched the real-time image sent by the camera. Jonah's girlfriend's house. Jessica sat silently on a stool. There were a bunch of alarm clocks behind her. This was a very interesting scene. Eric didn't know why there were so many alarm clocks around Jessica in the original version. However, Eric still had people set up the scene according to his memory. In the scene, Jessica's mother walked up to her quickly. "Jessica, you have to tell him where he is. Jonah's father is going crazy." The little girl rolled her eyes. She glanced at the hands of an alarm clock and ignored it. Then, the girl's father walked up with his hands on his waist. He put on the dignity of a father and said in a deep voice, "Jessica, I'm your father. Tell us where he is." Jessica hesitated. She felt that it was time. Using her usual style of speaking, she said 2 letters, New York. "What's that?" Sam quickly asked. "No way. It means impossible," Jessica's father said. He looked even angrier. "That's NW," Sam said helplessly. Then, the 3 adults realized something. They all looked at the little girl. "New York. He went to New York," the little girl said with a shrug. "What? How did he get there? How is that possible? He's just a kid." The 3 adults were shocked. "United Flight 597. Jessica then reported the flight's flight number. Sam quickly asked, "When does it leave?" 7:30. Jessica's father blurted out. The 3 of them looked at the pair of alarm clocks behind the girl. 7:30 just happened to ring. "Well done, Alice. Your performance was amazing," Eric shouted happily. At the same time, he looked at the girl who got up from the stool. Everyone around applauded excitedly. It was not because the little girl's performance was outstanding, but because this was the crew's last scene in Seattle. It was on the morning of September 24th, the 8th day of filming. The original 10-day shooting period in Seattle was because of Eric's special guidance. Victor Morris, who played Jonah, improved his acting skills very quickly. Therefore, they saved 2.5 days of filming. Perhaps it might not seem like much, but for the crew that spent hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, 2.5 days could save millions of dollars. Looking at his watch, it was not yet 10 o'clock. Eric raised the loudspeaker in his hand and said to the people around him, "Take a day off. You can walk around Seattle, but don't miss the flight tomorrow morning. If anyone misses the flight tomorrow morning, fly to New York by yourself." Huh. Amidst the laughter, except for the necessary personnel who stayed to clean up the scene, many people packed up and were ready to leave. On the side of the road, Eric gave detailed instructions to the staff responsible for escorting the film back to Los Angeles for initial processing and editing. After watching them get into the business car and leave, he returned to the small hotel with peace of mind. Back in his room, Eric took off his director's vest and changed into a black windbreaker. Thinking about the weather outside, he found an umbrella and went out again. "Hey, where are you going?" Elizabeth asked curiously when she saw that Eric was about to go out. The girl was forgetful. After a day or two, she was no longer brooding about Eric and Kelly Lowe. Her relationship with Eric had also returned to normal, just on the surface. Eric did not answer. Instead, he asked, "What's up?" Elizabeth took 2 steps forward. "Nothing. That's why I'm asking where you're going. Can I go with you?" "If you want," Eric nodded. "Then wait for me, I'll change," Elizabeth replied without hesitation. Then she turned and went back to the room. Chapter 241. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind I Am Hollywood, and listen to more of your suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account. Add friends on WeChat. Add official account. Type Dread, and tell me secretly. Soon, Elizabeth came out of the room wearing a bright pink windbreaker and holding a foldable umbrella in her hand. "Eric, let's go." Eric shook his head. This won't do. I remember you have a dark blue windbreaker. Change into that one. Elizabeth looked at Eric strangely and explained. It's not too cold today. That one is a bit thick. Then don't follow me. Eric shook his head and was about to leave when Elizabeth quickly grabbed Eric. Okay, I'll change. Because he was not familiar with the roads, Eric looked at the map and drove a rented car. It took them an hour and a half to reach their destination. Elizabeth looked out of the car and came over to compare it with the map. She couldn't tell for a while and asked, Eric, this is Volunteer Park. What are we doing here? Eric shook his head. Look carefully again. The park is in the south. The girl looked out of the car carefully and suddenly widened her eyes and shrank her neck. This is a cemetery. Bah, I wouldn't have followed you if I knew. Then you can wait here. Eric didn't force her. He said lightly and got out of the car. Elizabeth looked at Eric's back with a strange expression. After hesitating for a while, she got out of the car and followed him. Eric bought a bouquet of flowers at the flower shop next to the cemetery and asked the shop owner a few questions. Obviously, it wasn't the first time the shop owner had heard about it. He took out a small map of the cemetery and enthusiastically gave Eric some pointers. Elizabeth also heard some words like Bruce Lee from their conversation. She followed Eric into the cemetery. After walking for a while, she suddenly said, Oh, I remember. That Bruce Lee. Eric, who was walking in front, turned around and glared at the girl. Be quiet. Don't forget where we are. The girl immediately covered her small mouth, looked around, stuck out her tongue, and quickened her pace to catch up. After taking a few turns to the west, Eric soon saw a dark red tombstone. After confirming that it was the same as the shop owner's description, Eric walked over. Elizabeth followed. When she saw the picture on the tombstone, she tugged at Eric. What are we doing here? Take a look, Eric said softly. He took 2 steps forward and squatted down beside the black book sculpture. He placed the bouquet in his hand beside the tombstone. Elizabeth squatted down quietly and looked at Eric's focused face. She could clearly feel some inexplicable emotions coming from the man. It was neither sadness nor nostalgia. Occasionally, a smile would appear at the corner of his mouth, as if he had thought of something interesting. Eric did not hide his emotions, but he did not explain anything to the girl either. Since he was in Seattle, he had to come and take a look. He was not a die-hard fan of Bruce Lee, but his feelings for Bruce Lee's movies were perhaps purer than those who claimed to be die-hard fans. Even in his previous life, Bruce Lee had already passed away by the time he was born, let alone in this life. In his previous life, when Eric watched Bruce Lee's movies, he was still a little kid who did not know anything. It was in the mid-1980s. One of his friend's father made some money from his business and bought a video recorder at home. So every day after school, the group of kids would gather at that friend's house to watch videos. It was also at that time that Eric first saw Bruce Lee's School of Elite Martial Arts. That was the group of kids' favorite movie among the few videotapes they had. Hence, they watched it the most. Every time they finished watching it, the group of kids would howl in the streets and alleys, imitating the moves in the movie. They would make simple nunchakus with wooden sticks and ropes. They would often play role-playing games that children of that era often played, arguing endlessly over who should play the role of Chun-Jun. As he grew older, he received more information, and it became easier for him to watch movies. But he could no longer find the pure joy that he had when he was a child. Although so many years had passed, and he had even reincarnated due to a freak combination of factors, Eric could still clearly recall every detail of School of Elite Martial Arts. It was the kind of memory that made him smile with emotion, and not the cold, hard drive version of the memories that came with his mind due to his transmigration. After squatting in front of the tombstone for a while, Eric stood up, took 2 steps back, and bowed slightly to the tombstone. Looking at Elizabeth, who was unwilling but still imitating him, Eric finally smiled gently and said, "Okay, let's go." "Okay." Elizabeth, who still glanced at Eric from time to time, nodded and followed Eric to the cement road. The girl puffed up her cheeks and took a deep breath. Then she took 2 steps forward and reached out her arm to hold Eric's arm. Under Eric's puzzled gaze, the girl said softly, You walk too fast. I can't keep up. When the girl said this, there seemed to be a different meaning in her tone. Oh, then I'll walk slower. The emotions in Eric's mind had not completely dissipated, so he did not understand the other meaning in the girl's words. He just nodded and let the girl hang on to him. Until they walked out of the cemetery and got into the car, Elizabeth did not have the courage to ask her doubts. Of course, Eric would not take the initiative to answer the girl. Are you hungry? I'll take you to eat. Eric looked at the drizzle outside the car and asked Elizabeth, who was in the front passenger seat. The girl finally rolled her eyes. I haven't eaten enough these days. Then I'll take you to a big meal to make up for it. Eric smiled and started the car. Where do you want to go after lunch? Elizabeth thought for a while, and then shook her head. Eric asked tentatively, why don't we go to the University of Washington? It's not far from here. The University of Washington should come in spring. You can see cherry blossoms then. There's nothing to see now. Eric subconsciously thought of the University of Martial Arts. He did not expect there to be a school on the other side of the ocean famous for cherry blossoms. How about the Space Needle? Eric asked again. Although Seattle often appeared in many movies, Eric really did not know what attractions there were in Seattle. Other than Bruce Lee's resting place, Eric only knew of the Space Needle. I'm not going. My house is in Manhattan. I'm tired of climbing the Empire State Building. Eric finally shrugged. Okay, we'll go back after lunch. It just so happens that I have some things to take care of. Follow the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add a public account, type Kdred, and participate immediately. There's a prize for everyone. Follow Kdred's official account now. Chapter 242. After a short half-day break, the crew chartered a flight to New York the next day. This time, it was still Jeffrey who brought people to pick them up. Moreover, there was also a team from Firefly who was in charge of the preparation work for Sleepless in Seattle and Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. Compared to when they were in Seattle, most of the scenes were between Jonah and his son. The shooting in New York was much more troublesome. In terms of roles, Sleepless in Seattle not only included Anne's family, but also Anne's friends, colleagues, and so on. Eric felt that this plot design was probably to weaken the presence of Anne's boyfriend, Walter, just like how Sam's late wife, Maggie, was only shown in a few scenes. For Sam and Anne, this was indeed a very romantic love story. But for Walter, who was engaged to Anne, being dumped on a date on Valentine's Day for an inexplicable reason was a bit sad. Eric remembered that in some movie reviews in his previous life, there were comments on this matter. Generally, it was criticism of Anne's infidelity and sympathy for Walter. However, in a country with a divorce rate as high as 50%, it seemed that people did not care too much about this. To put it bluntly, whether it was in terms of politics or love, people in this country pursued one thing: freedom. Eric remembered that he had read a sentence somewhere. Real freedom was not doing what you wanted to do, but not doing what you didn't want to do. Although there was suspicion of being deliberately mystifying, this sentence was very suitable for Anne in Sleepless in Seattle. Even though she was engaged, when she found out that Walter was not the one she was destined to be with, she still rejected him without hesitation. How's the discussion about the Empire State Building and the Twin Towers going? After getting off the plane, Eric got into the MPV with Jeffrey. The first thing he said was the two things he was more concerned about. These two events were related to Sleepless in Seattle and Home Alone 2 respectively. Jonah and Kevin would be shooting in the two tallest buildings in New York, and until the start of Sleepless in Seattle, these two events had not been confirmed. It's all done. Jeffrey gave Eric a reassuring look, then said, however, the management of the two buildings didn't give us enough time. It's fine. There aren't many shots anyway. The main focus is the Empire State Building. We only need a few aerial shots of the Twin Towers. Eric nodded with satisfaction. Jeffrey added, there's one more thing. Regarding the snow, I've consulted the weather department in detail. The first snow in New York will be in November at the earliest. It might be in the first week of November, but I'm not sure. After all, it's only September now. You know, the weather forecast has never been accurate. Maybe we'll be lucky and it'll snow in October, or maybe we'll be unlucky and it won't snow until December. In short, you have to be mentally prepared. Eric nodded. This is nothing. Just get someone to prepare artificial snow. I'll try to put the exterior scenes of Home Alone 2 at the end. However, you know it can't be delayed for long, so I think there's a 90% chance that artificial snow will be used. I've already estimated according to your script. Although we don't need to cover the entire scene, the budget will increase by about $1.5 million to the point where the audience will believe the artificial snow is real. Eric patted Jeffrey's shoulder. Although the scale of Firefly was getting bigger and bigger, Jeffrey was still the same person that Eric saw in the past. However, this kind of personality was also the most suitable to be a producer. Jeffrey, it's not like last year. Last year, we had to be careful. In order to save the budget, we even had to go to a small town in the far north of Canada to shoot. Our budget for this movie is very loose, so there's no need to save the money that should be spent. I know, I just subconsciously thought that if we change the schedules of Sleepless in Seattle and Home Alone 2, maybe we can save $1.5 million. Eric smiled. According to what you said, we can save $1.5 million when it's natural snow. However, because we delay Home Alone 2 to Christmas, we may lose tens of millions in the box office. You have to know, from the box office trend of the last Home Alone, although this is a very suitable children's movie for long-term screening, we have to extend the holiday schedule as much as possible. The Christmas box office explosion period will start in late November. Then why not release Sleepless in Seattle in late November? Even if it's to not compete with Home Alone 2, I think it's fine to delay it by a week. Jeffrey asked again. Because Sleepless in Seattle is not only aiming for the Christmas slot, but also for February's Valentine's Day slot. Because this is a romantic comedy, if it's released a month in advance, then the popularity of this film will almost be exhausted by February. But if it's released around December 24th, after 2 months of screening, as long as the movie's quality is good enough, then after the Valentine's Day slot, this romantic movie's box office will rebound. You know, my movies have a large-scale box office harvest cycle of more than 8 weeks. For example, last year's first Home Alone was the box office champion for 10 weeks. Later, Pretty Woman and Dark War were the same. Jeffrey chuckled and said, I really don't know where you learned all these things from. I originally wanted to talk to you about the schedule of Island Horror. You encouraged Michael Eisner to release Island Horror on November 1st. And I also felt that it was very inappropriate. Halloween is indeed suitable for horror movies to be released, but those are all small horror movies that don't have any box office ambitions. Although Island Horror is also a small production, we have high hopes for its box office. Now it seems that you must have your own ideas. Eric nodded and didn't explain to Jeffrey anymore. Jeffrey also didn't intend to ask. In fact, the concept of the movie schedule in the United States was now very mature, but it was still relatively rough compared to more than 20 years later. Although Eric, who came from the future, didn't direct a movie, and didn't do the work of distribution, but in the era of information explosion, under the influence of what he saw and heard, he naturally understood some film distribution rules. Chapter 243. Although the heroine worked in Baltimore, except for some outdoor scenes outside the Sun Tower and other places in Baltimore, the rest of Anne's scenes were all shot in Manhattan, New York. The reason why Eric did this was to take care of the preparation work of Home Alone 2, at the same time. Most of the scenes of Home Alone 2 were near Central Park in Manhattan. In a remodeled apartment room, Eric shouted "NG" again, and then said to a white woman in her 30s, Ms. O'Donnell, when you say the lines about the character's ex-husband, you have to be more mean. Remember, when you say those lines, you have to hold a kind of resentment in your heart. Everything is your ex-husband's fault, and it has nothing to do with you. Rosie O'Donnell, who played Anne's co-worker, shrugged. You know, director, I have no feelings for this kind of thing at all, so I may have to try a few more times. The surrounding crew members chuckled. The reason why Rosie O'Donnell said so was that the 36-year-old rapper and actress was not only an extreme feminist, but also a lesbian. More importantly, she had never tried to cover it up like some other public figures. Not only did this woman have a fixed same-sex partner, but they were also living together. Although after coming to New York, because the scenes needed to be shot here were much more chaotic than in Seattle, it was inevitable that there would be such and such problems. But so far, the shooting progress was completely consistent with the previous expectations, so Eric was not in a hurry. Hearing Rosie O'Donnell's words, he smiled with the others and said, "Don't worry, let's take it slowly. I believe you will feel it after a few more times." Rosie O'Donnell nodded, and Eric immediately called for the start of another shooting. This set of scenes took a long time, so it was very demanding for Nicole and Rosie's acting skills. In fact, they had NG several times before, but they did not succeed. In the crisp sound of the clipboard, Becky, played by Rosie, began to say the lines, and guided and to write a letter according to the dialogue when the male and female protagonists of Golden Jade League met. After Annie finished typing on the typewriter, she realized that she was a little crazy. She was so obsessed that she wanted to meet another man on the top floor of the Empire State Building on Valentine's Day like in the movie Golden Jade Alliance. After all, that day was her date with her fiancé Walter. Scratching her hair frantically, and crumpled the letter into a ball and threw it out. Becky picked up the paper ball that was thrown on the sofa and looked at it. Then she thought of something and complained. "You know, because of that terrible fate, I married Martin and bought a house with a dead tree. So, I divorced him and got into a car accident and met Rick." When Becky said this, she didn't reflect on herself at all. Instead, her expression was full of hatred. Eric, who was behind the monitor, nodded slightly, but he felt that Rosie's expression was a little exaggerated at this time. However, he didn't immediately stop her. Instead, he let the two continue their conversation, and sat down next to Becky with a bowl of popcorn. Hearing her friend's complaint, she asked with interest, "Wait, you didn't mention that you divorced because of a tree." "It's because of the gardener," Becky blurted out, and asked, "You fell in love with the gardener?" After Becky said that, she showed a brief panic, and then said, "I didn't say I fell in love with him, did I?" Becky asked and then quickly changed the topic, directing Anne's attention to the Golden Jade League on the TV. And then Becky began to talk about the classic lines of the male and female protagonists, along with the plot on the TV. When they were moved, they cried together without caring about their image. But the expression looked very exaggerated, so not only did it not make people feel sad or moved, but it was also very funny. "Poochie." Eric heard a short snicker. His eyes, which were originally staring at the monitor, immediately swept to the source of the sound. The lighting engineer who made the snicker gave a stern warning look, and the other party also quickly apologized to Eric. Originally, Eric also thought that the scene of the two women being silly in front of the TV could be edited and used in the movie, but with this laughter, the scene was also ruined. After shouting to stop, Eric rubbed his forehead and said, "Well, I know that two women crying in front of a romantic comedy is ridiculous in the eyes of many men, but remember, you are working now. If you can't help it, go out later and I catch you making trouble. Even if you didn't mean it, I won't let you go easily. Everyone, get ready, one more time." After a few more takes, the scene was finally completed. It was already noon. After Eric announced the suspension of the shooting, he was about to have lunch when Elizabeth hurried in. "Eric, Donald Trumbull has been waiting for you outside for 2 hours, but because you have been shooting just now, I didn't inform you. Do you want to meet him?" Eric asked doubtfully. "Who is Donald Trumbull? Are you familiar with him?" Elizabeth explained. "Not really, but I do know him. He's a real estate tycoon in New York. He's built buildings all over the United States that bear his name. He's a very powerful man. I've met him a few times at parties in the past." After listening to Elizabeth's narration, Eric quickly searched for some fragmentary information about Donald Topland from his memory. There wasn't much information. It seemed that Donald Topland had left his star on the Walk of Fame as a Hollywood outsider with several popular variety shows. It seemed that this person was quite a troublemaker. At the same time, Eric quickly remembered Ivanka Trumbull's beautiful daughter. In his previous life, Ivanka Trumbull had been named the first of the top 10 unmarried women in the world by the media. She had a wealth of more than $2 billion. Eric had seen Ivanka Trumble's photos on the internet. She was indeed a great beauty. Her appearance was somewhat similar to Big Bing Bing of the mainland entertainment circle in his previous life. Although he remembered this person, one of them was in the film industry, and the other was in the real estate industry, so Eric was not very interested. He asked, "I don't know Donald Trumbull. Why is he looking for me?" Elizabeth shrugged. "Who knows? I just came to inform you. If you don't want to meet him, I will tell him that you are very busy and have no time." Eric looked at his watch. "Since Mr. Trumbull has been waiting for me for 2 hours, I will meet him. It is lunchtime anyway." "Then come with me," Elizabeth said and led Eric out of the set. Eric soon saw a middle-aged blonde man in a gray woolen coat, who looked to be in his early 40s. "Hello, Mr. Williams." Seeing Eric walk out of the set, the middle-aged man who was sitting in a luxury car quickly got out and shook Eric's hand enthusiastically. Eric was a little confused by the man's friendliness, but he still smiled and said, "Hello, Mr. Trumbull. What can I do for you?" Donald Trumbull seemed to appreciate Eric's straightforwardness. He smiled and said, "I think it's almost lunchtime, so I asked Miss Murdoch to pass on the message. Eric, do you mind if I call you that? There is a good restaurant nearby. I have already booked a seat. Can I invite you to have lunch with me?" Eric didn't mind the title very much. He nodded, then shook his head and refused. "Mr. Trumbull, I only have an hour, so I'm afraid. I promise I won't delay your work. The restaurant is at the corner of the street ahead." Donald Trumbull pointed not far away. Eric didn't know how to refuse Donald Trumbull's enthusiasm for a while. He looked back at Elizabeth, wanting the girl to help him out. But Donald Trumbull obviously misunderstood and immediately said, "Miss Murdoch can also come." Elizabeth, who was about to find an excuse for Eric, immediately shook her head and said, "No, Mr. Trumbull, I still have something to do." "That's a pity." Trumbull shook his head, then enthusiastically opened the door of the limousine for Eric and said, "Eric, let's go." "I don't think I've agreed yet," Eric muttered inwardly. However, seeing the other party's stance, it would seem too unreasonable to refuse. He had no choice but to get into the car. Donald Toplin got into the car and instructed the driver to drive to the destination. The two arrived at a restaurant. Eric and Donald were led to a quiet corner by the waiter. Sitting down in the chair, Donald immediately ordered the waiter to start serving. When the waiter left, he breathed a sigh of relief and carefully looked at Eric sitting opposite him. The two were indeed unrelated people. The reason why Donald Trumbull suddenly came forward to invite Eric personally was related to his current situation. As a real estate businessman, he had been working hard since the mid-70s. With his own talent and the help provided by the previous generation, Donald Trumbull had a fortune of $1.7 billion in just over 10 years. But since 1987, the collapse of the American stock market also affected the real estate industry, causing a Great Depression in the real estate market. Chapter 244. Under the influence of the Great Depression, Donald Toplin's assets shrank rapidly. In just over 2 years, Donald Toplin's assets had shrunk from $1.7 billion at the peak to $500 million at the present time. If that was all, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, the market value of many real estate companies had shrunk significantly. But before the Great Depression began, Donald Toplin was at the peak of his career. He was in high spirits and his real estate company was very big, so he owed hundreds of millions of dollars in loans to major banks and financial institutions. After the Great Depression began, because of continuous losses, his real estate company's capital chain was on the verge of collapse, and it could go bankrupt at any time. Although he had used his connections to persuade several banks to temporarily suspend the high interest payments on those loans, he could no longer borrow a penny from any institution. Without funds, his real estate company could no longer operate normally, and it could only be in a half-dead state. A few days ago, Donald happened to read an article about Eric in a newspaper. The article described Eric's miraculous rise in detail in an amazed tone. It also predicted that Eric's Firefly films could earn a net profit of $400 million with several movies released this year. The most conservative estimate was that Eric's Firefly films could earn a net profit of $400 million. After carefully reading the article several times, Donald Topland immediately had an idea. After all, even a large group company with a market value of tens of billions of dollars was unlikely to have $200 million in cash. If he could get this amount of money from Firefly, even if it was only half, he could successfully survive this bankruptcy crisis. Donald Topland had an advantage common to all shrewd businessmen. That was, he was good at seizing all opportunities that he could seize. He didn't think about the probability of success. As long as he tried, there were only two possibilities in the end: success or failure. If he didn't try, there was only one possibility. After Donald Topland made up his mind, he immediately found a detective company and collected a lot of information about Eric in detail. He found out that Eric had bought Pixar Studios. Pixar Studios had always been a sore point for Jobs. It had been losing money since it was bought. At the beginning of the year, the studio was bought by Eric for $20 million. According to the information he collected, Pixar's loss this year was $10 million higher than before. Therefore, the information he collected had a very low evaluation of Eric's acquisition. He even used words like stupid to describe Eric's acquisition. However, this was exactly what Donald wanted to see. He felt that other than being very talented in movies, this young man was not very smart in business. In other words, other than movies, he was not very smart. If that was really the case, it would be great. Donald Topland originally planned to go to Seattle in person, but then he learned that Eric had led the crew to New York, which was his home base. Because it was impossible to contact a middleman for an introduction in a short time, and Eric was busy shooting the movie and did not participate in any social activities, Donald had to take the risk of going to the door in person. He had previously analyzed Eric's character and felt that since he became famous at a young age, Eric must have the pride and vanity that young people of his age should have. In order to cater to Eric's heart, Donald Topland deliberately arrived 2 hours early and revealed the news to the crew. At this time, looking at the 19-year-old young man in front of him, who was still young despite the faint stubble on his chin, Donald Topland felt envious. The investment agency estimated that the market value of Firefly, after the merger with New Line, had exceeded $1 billion. Based on the number of shares, the young man's net worth was already twice his current net worth. And it only took him a short year to achieve all this. But now was not the time to sigh. Donald Topland quickly sorted out a series of words he had prepared before in his mind. When he was about to speak, Eric spoke first. "Mr. Donald, are you a fan of mine?" Donald Topland was stunned and subconsciously wanted to nod, but then he decided to tell the truth. "No, I'm not, but I like your movie Dark War very much. When it comes out on videotape in the future, I will definitely buy a box of it back for my collection." "Oh, thank you." Eric nodded politely and did not speak again. He watched the waiter serve their lunch and pour red wine for them, but he was silently calculating in his heart. Donald Topland obviously wouldn't come to him for no reason, but Eric couldn't understand why the other party came to him. Could it be that he wants to play a small role in my movie? Thinking of Donald Topland's character in his previous life, Eric subconsciously felt that this was quite possible. However, there was definitely no chance for him to play in Sleepless in Seattle. Could it be that the other party wants to make a guest appearance in Home Alone 2? Eric was just about to abandon this ridiculous idea, but he suddenly raised his head and carefully looked at Donald Topland opposite him. "What the fuck?" Eric muttered speechlessly, thinking that it couldn't be such a coincidence, right? Because just now, when he subconsciously recalled the plot of Home Alone 2 in his memory, he suddenly realized that Donald Topland did make a guest appearance in this kid-oriented movie. About 20 minutes into the movie, Kevin came to New York by accident and checked into the Plaza Hotel near Central Park. Donald Topland played a fleeting role as a passerby who showed the little guy the way. There was also a line and a frontal shot. Originally, Eric also knew that there was such a role as a guide, but he was very busy some time ago. Except for the main actors of Home Alone 2, he didn't care about the small roles at all, and left them to the casting director. For a small role like Donald Topland's cameo, the actor didn't even need to be confirmed in advance. Usually, during the shooting, an extra or a strong man from the crew would be found to make a cameo. So Eric didn't think much about the person's identity. If Donald Topland wasn't sitting in front of him, Eric would probably never have thought of it. After pondering for a few seconds, Eric still didn't feel that there was any point in making a cameo with such a small role with no name and only one line. He could only say that this New York real estate tycoon was really free. Chapter 245. When he was about to speak, he was suddenly interrupted by Eric. When the waiter finished serving the dishes, Donald Trumbull saw Eric's strange look and was worried that the young man would say something that would make him confused. Donald Trumbull quickly took the lead and said, "Eric, have you been to New York before?" Eric nodded. "I've been here a few times." "How do you feel about this place?" Donald pointed outside. Eric smiled and told the truth. "I don't feel anything. I came here in a hurry the last few times, and it was all business." Donald nodded and then said, "You should walk around and see more. A bustling world-class metropolis like New York is a paradise for people like us. By the way, have you ever thought about buying property in New York? You should know that housing prices are very cheap recently. Maybe in a year or two, housing prices in New York will soar again." Eric looked at Donald Trumbull suspiciously. "This real estate tycoon came to me personally. Is he trying to sell me a house? That's ridiculous." Eric raised his wrist and looked at his watch. Then he said, "Mr. Trumbull, you should know that I don't have much time. So if there's anything, you can tell me directly." Donald Trumbull wanted to spend a few minutes to guide him slowly. When he heard Eric ask so straightforwardly, the real estate tycoon, who had always been very decisive, put down the cutlery in his hand, changed his sitting posture, and said to Eric, "Eric, are you interested in the real estate industry?" Eric felt that he understood a little, but he still didn't fully understand. He could only continue to ask, "What do you mean?" Donald Trumbull's tone was full of temptation. "I mean, do you want to invest in real estate? You have to know that now is a great opportunity to buy into the North American real estate industry. If you miss this opportunity, you may have to wait for at least 20 years. Eric didn't know if the real estate tycoon was intentional or not, but he really calculated in his mind. From now to the future subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, it would be 20 years. Putting aside this inexplicable thought, Eric asked calmly, "Why me, Mr. Donald? If it's really as you said, now is a great opportunity, then there should be many people buying into the real estate market, right?" Donald Trumbull replied without hesitation. "Of course, there are many people who want to buy into the real estate market, but they don't have your advantage." Eric smiled and asked, "You mean my funds?" Donald Topland nodded solemnly and said, "Eric, I happened to see some news about you in the newspaper, so I couldn't help but take the liberty to pay you a visit. But this is also a great opportunity for you. Your Firefly company will generate a lot of profits this year, right? If you use it to invest in real estate, I promise you that in a few years, the value of this sum of money will more than double. This is much less risky than investing in movies." Eric asked with interest, "Mr. Trumbull, if I decide to invest in real estate, do you have any good suggestions?" Donald Trumbull was stunned. He didn't expect this young man to be so direct, but seeing the other party's playful eyes, Donald Trumbull's face finally flashed with embarrassment. However, he quickly remembered the purpose of his visit this time, so he threw these emotions to the back of his mind and said, "My real estate company just happened to need financing recently, but you should have heard about the recent economic situation in our country, so it's not easy to get a loan from the bank. And I just saw something about you in the newspaper. Eric, what do you think?" Eric shook his head. "Mr. Trumbull, I don't actually have much money in my hands. If you know me a little, you'll find that I spent almost all the money I earned this year. Don't you still have a few movies at the end of the year?" Donald Trumbull immediately said, "Eric, your company has 5 movies released at the end of the year, and all of them are very promising movies by distributors. They can bring at least $100 million in profit, right?" "Sorry, Mr. Trumbull, I'm not interested in investing in real estate." Eric shook his head directly. Although Eric's knowledge in his previous life made him feel that real estate was very profitable, Eric knew nothing about this industry. It was estimated that if he invested $100 or $200 million, it would be a waste. In the end, whether he could get his capital back was a problem. In contrast, Eric would rather invest in movies. After all, he knew the blockbuster movies in recent years like the back of his hand. Even if he had too much money to spend in the end, he would definitely invest in the industry he was more familiar with, not real estate, which he knew nothing about. After Donald Trumbull was rejected by Eric, he was not discouraged at all, but he did not persuade him again. He knew that as long as this young man had some sense, the other party would not immediately agree to him, even if he talked until his mouth was broken. The most important thing now was to establish a long-term relationship with Eric. He believed that with his communication skills, even if the age difference between the two sides was a little big, he could easily become friends with the other party. So Donald Trumbull's expression then became relaxed and he said casually, "Eric, I heard a few days ago that your Home Alone 2 crew was negotiating with a hotel to film live scenes. How about the Grand Hyatt Hotel on 42nd Avenue? That's my property. I can let your crew film there for free." Eric refused. "No, we have already negotiated with the Plaza Hotel next to Central Park, and the other party has agreed to let us use it for free." Donald Trumbull was very clear about the grade of the Plaza Hotel, and asked in disbelief, "Free?" Eric nodded, slightly proud. It was not easy to let a 5-star hotel be used by the crew for free, and even the staff were willing to be extras. The reason for this was due to Pretty Woman. The Wilshire Hotel in Los Angeles was the filming location of Pretty Woman. After the movie became popular, the hotel also became popular, and even became a scenic spot in Beverly Hills. During this period, many people who travel to Los Angeles will go to the Wilshire Hotel to have a look, and those who can afford it will stay there. Although Donald Toplin's Grand Hyatt Hotel on 42nd Avenue was of good quality, it wasn't as luxurious as the Plaza Hotel. Therefore, after hearing Eric's words, Donald Toplin didn't try to persuade him again. After thinking about it, Donald Trumbull then said, "So Eric, what do you think of me?" "What? I mean, do you think I can play a cameo role in your movie?" Eric raised his eyebrows and thought of a passerby in Home Alone 2, and asked, "Are you sure?" Donald Trumbull saw that there was a chance and quickly said, "Of course, I have also played a cameo role in several TV series before. I think the movie must be similar, right?" The reason why Donald Trumbull was so eager was not because he valued the cameo opportunity. Even if he had this hobby before, it was impossible for him to have any interest in it now that the company was in danger. He did this just to keep in touch with Eric and continue to persuade Eric. Since he had delivered himself to the door, Eric nodded naturally, but with a playful smile he said, "If you want, of course, no problem." After a pleasant lunch, Donald Trumbull quickly sent Eric back to the set. Everyone pay attention, it's time to work. Alan, where's Alan?" Eric walked into the set, picked up the loudspeaker and shouted. The people who were still resting immediately gathered, and began to go to their posts to get busy. "Mr. Williams, are you looking for me?" Alan asked, coming out of nowhere. Eric nodded. "You don't have to be here in the afternoon. Help me collect some information about Donald Trumbull's company." "Who is Donald Trumbull?" Alan asked, puzzled. Eric was too lazy to explain to him. He pointed to Elizabeth, who was coming over. "Ask Liz and give me the information tonight." "Oh." Alan nodded and walked to Elizabeth. Eric immediately began to instruct the crew to prepare for the scenes to be shot in the afternoon. In the hotel where the crew stayed, the environment this time was countless times better than in Seattle. The sound of water in the bathroom stopped for a while, and a moment later, Eric walked out with a towel wrapped around his waist. Nicole, who was lying on the bed in a light blue nightgown and reading a magazine, heard the noise and got up. She raised a document on the bedside table. "Alan just came and brought this?" Eric raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You opened the door?" The girl nodded innocently. "I called you, but you didn't hear me, so I had to." Eric stared at the girl helplessly and sighed. "Okay." Seeing that Eric didn't pursue the matter, Nicole was secretly relieved again. Very few people knew about her relationship with Eric. Even Jennifer Aniston didn't know. That silly girl still thought that Eric had chosen her through a proper audition. However, although Nicole didn't want outsiders to know about her relationship with Eric, she still had to let those who should know, such as Jeffrey, Eric's assistant, or other important people around Eric know. Chapter 246. For example, Jennifer Aniston as Eric's girlfriend was like a princess in the Friends crew. In other words, she was the princess of the Friends crew. Even if the other 5 leads were as famous as Jennifer Aniston received more special treatment than the other 5. UTA's resources to Jennifer Aniston were incomparable to the other 5 leads. Although this had something to do with Jennifer Aniston's father being the producer of Friends, everyone knew that this was mainly because of Eric. After all, Eric was the boss, and although Jennifer Aniston's father held the production rights of Friends, he was only an employee. It was fine if Eric didn't intervene, but once Eric decided to intervene, Jennifer Aniston could only listen to the boss. When she saw Jennifer Aniston enjoying a series of special treatment, she was envious. Of course, Nicole also wanted to enjoy this kind of treatment. As for the rest, she didn't care if those who knew about it secretly criticized her behind her back. As long as they knew that she was Eric's woman, they had to carefully support her. As for the media, without any evidence, Nicole didn't care too much about the tabloids. After all, in Hollywood, there was no star who didn't have a scandal made up by the tabloids. If there was no news for a long time, even the stars themselves couldn't stand it, and took the initiative to create news. Some Hollywood actors who were not good at acting and were not famous completely relied on all kinds of news to maintain their influence in Hollywood. Moreover, although many of these rumors were true, without evidence, everything was in vain. However, even though Nicole had such thoughts, Eric had never taken the initiative to introduce their relationship to anyone else. Thus, the girl could only do it herself. During this period of time, she had created some small surprises and hints without leaving a trace. Almost everyone who should know about her relationship with Eric knew about it, but those who shouldn't know were still kept in the dark. In fact, Eric was very clear about the girl's thoughts, but Nicole had been very careful and didn't touch his bottom line at all. What else could he do? He couldn't explain to those who knew about their relationship one by one. Explaining was covering up, and covering up was the truth. Sigh, what a headache. The corner of Eric's mouth curled up in a small, helpless smile. Seeing this, Nicole also became cautious, afraid that Eric would suddenly lose his temper or something. Eric walked over silently, picked up the document sent by Alan, and patted it beside him. The girl realized that Eric wasn't angry, so she immediately showed a beautiful smile and obediently came over. Stop fooling around. Wait for me to finish reading these things. Nicole came over and asked, "What?" Eric said, "Information about the real estate tycoon who treated me to lunch this afternoon." "Oh." The girl nodded, not interested at all. Eric didn't pay attention to the girl's little movements and flipped the document to the next page from time to time. Alan didn't collect much information in a hurry, but it was enough for Eric to have a full understanding of Donald Topland. After reading the information in the document, Eric found that what Donald Topland said at noon was half true and half false. Perhaps the other party also knew that if he was interested in the future, he would definitely collect relevant information, so he didn't dare to fabricate it. However, in some places the concept was secretly changed, and some things were ambiguous. As Donald said, his real estate company needed financing. This was true. The capital chain of Donald's real estate company was so tight that it could break at any time. However, the bank was unwilling to lend to his company, not because of the overall economic situation in the United States, but because Donald Topland, because of his ambition, had expanded his company too much. Therefore, he was the most affected in the decline of the real estate industry at the beginning of this year. It was so big that the bank was in a dilemma and treated him like a boss. This was because once Donald's real estate company went bankrupt, the bank groups would suffer the greatest loss. Although the bank groups also did some work to prevent Donald's real estate company from going bankrupt, they were no longer willing to lend Donald a penny. After that, Eric put his eyes on the document again. Nicole bit her lip. Although Eric said it was okay, the girl keenly caught a touch of displeasure in Eric's eyes and immediately dismissed the original idea. Eric flipped to the back and found that Alan had also found some articles about the economic experts' analysis of the real estate industry in North America in recent years. Then he found another problem. Donald told him at lunch that now was a good opportunity to buy the real estate industry, but the economic experts analyzed that the real estate industry's recession had just begun. According to the previous pattern, this decline would continue for another 2 or 3 years. As for how long it would stay in the undervaluation period, it would depend on the subsequent economic situation. In other words, investing in real estate in North America was not a wise choice for at least the next 5 years. The last graph of the North American housing price curve completely dispelled Eric's initial interest. This was because the overall trend of housing prices in North America from the 50s to the 90s was not the same as what Donald Trump said at lunch. Although there had been ups and downs, it had remained in a relatively stable range. Although there would definitely be currency inflation in the past 40 years, there would not be much change in housing prices. This was not like the situation on the other side of the ocean in his previous life. The housing prices in North America were closely related to the economic situation. Zhengzhi had little impact on housing prices. On the other side of the ocean, it was the opposite. The housing prices were controlled by Zhengzhi. Therefore, in his previous life, there were experts on the other side of the ocean who claimed that housing prices would plummet every year, but they never fell. This was because those experts only analyzed from an economic perspective and forgot the reason for Zhengzhi. Housing prices supported the country's strength, supported its reputation, and supported the second in the world. Therefore, housing prices could not fall. Even if they did not want money, they had to save face. Therefore, every time there was a downward trend in housing prices, the original tightening policies were like a belt around the waist of a man who had seen a beautiful woman. All kinds of stimulus policies came one after another. After shaking his head hard to get rid of these thoughts, Eric threw the document aside and turned his attention to Nicole. Chapter 247. After nearly 20 days of intense filming, Sleepless in Seattle finally wrapped up. However, Eric did not enjoy the moment of leisure at all, because the filming of Home Alone 2 would be even more arduous. Although the plot of the second film was the same as the first, there were quite a few innovations. The most important thing was that compared to the first film, which was mostly set in Kevin's home, the plot of the second film was richer. In addition to the two stupid thieves, there were also story branches such as the Plaza Hotel and Central Park. "You're leaving so early?" Early in the morning, Eric walked out of the hotel room and saw Elizabeth carrying a simple backpack. She was walking out of the hotel. When Elizabeth heard Eric's voice, she stopped and turned around. She blinked at Eric and asked, "Do you want me to stay?" Eric didn't know how to answer for a while. In the beginning, he had always resisted the girl joining the cast of Sleepless in Seattle, because he thought this chick might bring trouble. However, after getting along for a few weeks, although the two still bickered in private, Elizabeth did her job very well. Although it had been less than a month, she and Eric had already established some tacit understanding. After a moment of silence, Eric shook his head and said, "Forget it. Even if I agree, your father will definitely not let you stay with me all the time." Elizabeth's eyes flashed with a trace of disappointment. She bit her lower lip and softly explained, "My father can't control me." Eric smiled and asked, "Do you still plan to go back to Los Angeles?" "You're so stupid. My house is in Manhattan. Do you think everyone in the world should live in Los Angeles?" The girl subconsciously ridiculed Eric. Seeing the slight embarrassment on Eric's face, she opened her mouth and said, I'm going back to school. Also, thank you for the information you provided me during this time." "It's nothing, in fact, I'm just," Eric said and quickly stopped. He would be exposed if he continued. What the two of them were talking about was actually the graduation thesis that Elizabeth and Eric had mentioned when they first met. It was about the box office success of Eric's movies. Eric could only recount some of the analysis articles that he had occasionally read in his previous life to the girl. At the same time, he also provided some of his thoughts and details during the shooting. Elizabeth waited for a brief moment. Seeing that Eric had stopped halfway, She did not pursue the matter and said, I intend to finish my thesis before the end of the year and start producing my first movie early next year. Then I will release it during the summer. Did you have any movies at that time? Eric nodded. Although he wouldn't work as hard as he did this year next year, he definitely couldn't let go of the summer break. Then how about we compete in the box office then? The girl's competitive spirit was aroused and she blurted out this sentence without thinking. Eric subconsciously wanted to say that he would give her a 0, but then he remembered that Elizabeth was going to produce the famous The Silence of the Lambs. This movie was so famous in his previous life, so the box office would definitely not be too bad. It would definitely be more than 100 million USD. After Elizabeth said this sentence, she quickly realized that she was overestimating herself. She panicked and pulled the strap of her backpack and said, Forget it, I definitely can't beat you. Then, goodbye. Eric followed and said, Then goodbye, do you want me to help you with your luggage? No, the waiter already took my luggage downstairs. The taxi is waiting downstairs. Then I'll send you downstairs. Eric followed the girl to the elevator. After watching the yellow taxi drive away, Eric walked back to the hotel again. As he walked towards the restaurant, Nicole, who was wearing a slim jacket and jeans, walked over. Morning, Eric. Good morning. Eric nodded at the girl and said, Want breakfast? Yeah. Nicole stepped forward and walked side by side with Eric to the restaurant. The two ordered breakfast and sat down at a table. Eric asked, By the way, when are you leaving? Nicole showed a touch of bitterness and said, You were so reluctant when you sent the Murdoch family's second daughter off, and now you want me to leave. Don't mess around. Eric glared at the girl and said, You know I didn't mean that. Nicole saw that Eric was not in a good mood, so she stopped joking and said, I haven't been back to Sydney for more than half a year, so I plan to take advantage of this free time to go back and accompany my family. As for when I'll come back, it depends on the promotional schedule for Sleepless in Seattle. Eric suggested, How about this, I'll tell them to let you come back after Thanksgiving. Nicole smiled and shook her head. No need. Have you forgotten that there is no Thanksgiving in Australia? Besides, it's summer in the Southern Hemisphere. Although Christmas is lively, it always lacks that kind of atmosphere, so it's okay to miss it. I'll come back on time according to the promotional schedule. The two chatted as they ate. Nicole quickly finished the simple breakfast in front of her and wiped her mouth with a tissue. She looked around and leaned over to Eric and whispered, My plane ticket is tomorrow, so I'll be away for a long time. Can I go to your room again tonight? Nicole's voice was not soft, but it was not soft either. If someone paid attention to them, it was likely to be heard. Eric glared at the bold girl and finally nodded gently. Be careful. Don't always bump into people. Nicole smiled. She used the sweet smile of Anne in Seattle. She had almost figured out Eric's character. Although this man was very strong, he was not a harsh person. So sometimes, she even enjoyed seeing Eric's gloomy and helpless expression, even though he knew what she was up to. In the last few days of Sleepless in Seattle, an assistant director had already started to shoot some simple scenes of the kid too, according to Eric's instructions. For example, the aerial shot when Kevin climbed to the top of the Twin Towers, or the scene when he took a taxi across the Brooklyn Bridge. Therefore, after Sleepless in Seattle wrapped up yesterday, the crew had a day to rest. However, Eric could not rest for a moment. Not only did he have to make countless phone calls every day to remotely control the post-production of Seattle, he also had to check the pre-production of The Kid too, to determine what could be used and what needed to be res hot. The next day, Eric personally started the filming of The Kid 2. According to the order of easy to difficult, the starting scene was set in the Plaza Hotel. Stu, wait, you go straight from here. When you reach that place, stop this gentleman and ask for directions, and then continue. Remember, don't walk too fast, understand? Of course, Eric, you have to repeatedly tell me such a simple thing. Do you think I'm an idiot? The little guy rolled his eyes. At this time, the boy was wearing a thick suit, a knitted hat on his head, and a small brown backpack on his back. He was standing beside Eric. Seeing the gloomy look on Eric's face after hearing the little guy's words, Donald Tepland, who had specially come to make a guest appearance, laughed out loud. He looked at Stu and said, "What an interesting little guy. Well, anyway, just remember. Now go to the door, let's get ready to start." After Eric finished speaking, he walked to the monitor, and at the same time, he took the walkie-talkie and told all the extras scattered in the corridor to start taking positions. This long shot was not difficult for Stu at all. With the little guy's acting skills, it was not a problem at all to walk from the door through the corridor to the hall. The most difficult thing was for the cameraman and the sound recordist. Because this was a half-a-minute-long head-on shooting, there was no way to lay down a camera track. The cameraman, Nickel, could only carry the heavy camera in his hand and bend down to the rhythm of the little guy. Therefore, although it was just a simple walking shot, it required at least 5 people to cooperate. In addition to the sound recordist and cameraman, there were also several assistants. With the sound recordist and cameraman's actions, they cooperated with the closing of the cables connected to the microphone and the camera. "Nickel, are you ready?" Eric walked to the hotel lobby, where the director's monitor was placed. He was still holding the walkie-talkie to confirm with everyone one by one, and from time to time, there were sounds like "okay." When Eric came near the monitor, he saw a tuft of golden hair faintly flashing behind the monitor. Eric hurriedly took 2 steps forward, and finally saw a little girl wearing a pink children's trench coat. She was lying behind the director's monitor and a bunch of other equipment, curiously touching here and there. The little loli looked to be about 10 years old, and was slightly taller than Stu. Her golden hair had a beautiful pink cartoon hairpin, and she had beautiful bangs on her forehead. Her eyelashes were long, and her big eyes blinked occasionally. Her pointed chin already showed that she was a beauty. Seeing that Eric was looking at her, the little loli only glanced at him, and continued to fiddle with it curiously. The surrounding staff members also ignored the little girl, as if they were familiar with her. What was going on? Could it be that his position was unknowingly occupied by an unknown Lolita star? "Hey little guy, who are you?" Eric took 2 steps forward and blocked the little girl's small hand that was about to press the button beside the monitor. At the same time, he could not help but reach out to pinch the little loli's chubby cheeks. "And who are you?" The little loli nimbly avoided Eric's evil claws, and looked at Eric with vigilance. Eric smiled and pointed at the seat behind the little loli. "I am the person who should be sitting in that seat." The little loli turned her head to look, and immediately pouted her small mouth, and said with disdain, "Humph, can't you just say that you are the director? Adults like to beat around the bush." "All right, I am Eric Williams, this little loli little lady. Can you tell me your name?" Eric said as he reached out his hand to the little loli. The little loli immediately took a step back with a look of disdain, and did not have any intention to shake Eric's hand. She raised her chin and said with a clear childish voice, "My name is Ivanka." Eric raised his eyebrows. "Ivanka? Ivanka Topland?" "Yes." The little loli nodded. Chapter 248. Eric immediately understood why little loli was here. She must have been brought here by Donald Topland. However, the surrounding staff members were really derelict in their duties. Even if the little fellow was allowed to stay here, they shouldn't have let her touch the movie equipment here at will. Just as he was about to reprimand the staff who acted as if nothing had happened, the intercom rustled. "Eric, everything is ready. Can we start?" "Oh, of course," Eric replied. He put the matter aside for the time being, hurriedly put on his headphones and walked behind the monitor. The scene began. Kevin walked into the hotel lobby, looked around, and began to walk along the corridor to the lobby. The camera followed the boy's movements and slowly moved backward. "Cut, Nickel, what's going on over there? Didn't you notice that the camera is a little off?" Again. Eric immediately shouted into the intercom after taking a few steps. Nickel's apologetic voice came from the intercom, and then it took 2 minutes for everyone, including the extras, to get back into position before the shooting began again. "Cut, Royce, in the part you're in charge of, the guy in the blue knitted coat, tell him to focus. It's hard to imagine that someone would look at the camera lens. If this happens again, tell him to get out and start again." Cut. Cut. After countless NGs, Eric pointed out some mistakes again. Just as he was about to start again, Nicole's voice came from the intercom. Eric, I can't take it anymore. I'm almost exhausted. Eric was stunned, and then realized that there was no camera track this time. Instead, Nicole was carrying a heavy camera and filming. Helplessly taking off the headphones, Eric said to the floor supervisor next to him, "Tell everyone to take a 10-minute break. You're so stupid. You can't even get the same shot right after taking so many shots," Ivanka, who had been peeking behind Eric, said as soon as he sat down in the director's chair and took a glass of water from his assistant. Eric spat out the mouthful of water in his mouth. The sudden situation scared the little loli next to him and she screamed. Ahem. Eric patted his chest a few times and then said, "Ivanka, don't you see? This has nothing to do with me." The little loli put her hands in her pockets, raised her chin proudly and said with dissatisfaction, "Sir, please call me Miss Topland." Eric was speechless. He suddenly remembered the famous phrase, "Please call me Her Majesty the Queen." Just as he was about to say something, Nicole, Stuart, and some other important members of the crew came over. "Dad." Ivanka walked over to Donald and held his hand when she saw him. "What?" "It's nothing. You even said that he's very, very good. But I've watched him for so long, and he can't even shoot a simple walking scene. He's far worse than those directors you've brought me to before." Before Eric could react, Nicole was already embarrassed. Most of the mistakes in the shot just now were on him, the cameraman. Now, Eric was ridiculed by the little loli in front of so many people. "Eric, I'm so sorry," Nicole said to Eric apologetically. "It's okay. Everyone knows that this is not an easy scene." Eric patted Nicole's shoulder comfortingly and said, "Go and rest for a while. Find someone to massage your arm. Try a few more times in 10 minutes. If it doesn't work, we'll shoot other scenes first." Nicole nodded and turned to leave. "You're Kevin." Eric soon heard the little loli's voice again. "Actually, my name is Stuart Runkle." Stu took the initiative to introduce himself. It was rare to see someone of the same age in the crew. "I heard that you're also 8 years old. Why are you so much shorter than me?" The little loli moved in front of Stu. Her small hand brushed the boy's head and directly touched the tip of her nose. Stu was precocious, and the boy's sexual awareness was already showing signs of awakening. Therefore, when he was ridiculed for being short by a Barbie-like little loli, he was immediately unhappy and retorted, "I'll definitely grow taller than you in the future. You're not even as tall as me now. What's the point of talking about the future?" The group of people couldn't help but laugh. Although Donald Trumbull was also laughing, he pulled his daughter and said, "Ivanka, don't be so rude. In fact, Stu is also very good. He shot a movie last year." "What's so great about that? I can also walk around like that," Ivanka retorted indignantly. "Then why don't you act for us?" Stu immediately seized the opportunity. Although the little girl was only 8 years old, she knew that acting was not so easy. Ivanka looked around and then locked her eyes on Eric. "Mr. Williams, can you let me try the scene just now?" Since she was asking for help, the little loli didn't use honorifics. Eric shrugged and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Trumbull. Our cameraman is taking a break." "What about you? Aren't you the director? Why don't you come?" "Me?" Eric asked in confusion. "Yeah, you're not going to tell me that you can't do anything other than being a director, right?" Ivanka said in a standard mocking tone. "Can't do anything other than being a director." The little loli's words were really lethal. Although the staff members who had been with Eric for a long time were definitely the kind of director who had a lot of skills, when they heard the little loli's words, they couldn't help but laugh and jeer at the same time. "Eric, show her what you can do. Mr. Williams, don't let this little lady look down on you." "Director, if you do it, I'll help you pull the cable." Amidst the buzzing noise, Eric clapped his hands in distress and said, "Quiet, quiet, don't forget where we are." When the crowd gradually quieted down, Eric turned to the little loli and said, "Miss Trumbull, do you really want to try?" Ivanka raised her chin and said, "Of course." "Okay then," Eric said. "You must have seen Stu's performance from the monitor just now, so I don't need to tell you how to perform, right?" "Yeah." The little loli nodded and repeated, "I came in from the door, asked my dad for directions in the second corridor, and then walked all the way here. Very good, then let's do it again. Eric nodded. Since it was a break, the extras obviously didn't need to move. However, Donald Trumbull was obviously very satisfied with his daughter's performance, so he took the initiative to cooperate with the shoot. He also asked Eric to keep the film as he planned to engrave it into a videotape as a souvenir. In the entrance hall, Ivanka saw a large group of people behind Eric, who was holding a camera, looking at her. Although she tried to remain calm, the constant flickering of her eyes betrayed the panic in the little girl's heart. Miss Trumbull, Act 1, Scene 1, Action. The script keeper mischievously hit the board and quickly moved to the side. The little loli quickly blinked a few times and looked at the camera lens and the people looking at her. For some reason, she felt a little numb in her hands and feet, but she still stubbornly lifted her feet and walked forward. As she walked, she also looked left and right like Stu. But after only a few times, Ivanka felt that she couldn't take it anymore and quickened her pace. Just like that, she walked all the way to the second corridor. When she saw her father walking towards her with an encouraging look in his eyes, Ivanka felt as if she had seen her savior. At this time, perhaps only her father could give her a sense of security. Without hesitation, the little loli ran away from the camera in panic and ran to her father with tears in her eyes. She said with a faint sobbing tone, "Dad, I don't want to act anymore." "Nickel, how about this? We shoot the scenes in the first and second corridors separately. This way, the success rate will be higher and there will be less trouble." Although the little loli Ivanka ran away halfway, Eric carried the camera and walked through the empty shot. At the same time, he also found that it was not easy to film this part of the scene in one shot. Moreover, there would be post-production editing, so it was better to shoot it in two parts. Therefore, after Nickel rested, Eric did not immediately start shooting. Instead, he discussed with the cameraman again. At this time, there was a simple floor plan of the Plaza Hotel in front of the two of them. Eric pointed with a pencil and said, "From here to here, as the first part of the scene, the next part of the scene will start from here, all the way to the lobby." Nickel pondered for a moment according to Eric's words and said, "So, the extras also have to be shot in two parts?" "Well, that's not a problem. It can be arranged in 10 minutes. Stu is also not a problem. The main thing is still you. How do you feel now?" "I'm fine too." Nickel waved his hand. "If it's divided into two parts, it's no problem at all." "Well, that's it," Eric said, then looked up and said to the people around him, "You heard it too. Everyone go and get ready. 10 minutes. After the crowd dispersed, Eric returned to his director's seat. At this time, the little loli Ivanka was holding a box of unprocessed film in her arms. She looked like a little phoenix in the rain, with a dejected look on her face. She was no longer the arrogant little sharp-tongued person she used to be. Donald Topland also sat next to his daughter, comforting her in a low voice. Chapter 249. Eric. Donald Topland called out to Eric softly and gestured at his daughter in his arms. Ivanka looked very upset because of the failure of her performance. Although Donald Topland was eloquent enough to engage in multi-level marketing, he comforted, encouraged, and even reprimanded his daughter in his usual way for a while, but it didn't seem to have any effect. He could only ask Eric for help. Although it was the little loli who started it, if Eric didn't agree just now, this wouldn't have happened. Eric couldn't refuse, so he could only pull a chair to Ivanka's side. The little loli glanced at Eric from the corner of her eyes and moved closer to her father. "Ivanka, this must be your first performance, right?" Eric thought about his words and asked gently. After a while, Ivanka nodded gently. "I remember when I was in school, it was a music class. The teacher asked one of our classmates to sing a song on the podium. In the end, because that guy was too nervous, he stumbled and sang a few lines. In the end, he fainted directly on the podium. That was also his first performance. So your performance just now was already very good. You completed more than half of the scene." Eric made a comparison in advance and arranged an excuse for the little loli to get rid of the trauma in her heart. Sure enough, after hearing Eric's words, Ivanka seemed to relax a lot. However, she still said softly, But when I was in school, I also sang for everyone. It didn't happen like what you said. Then you must be on stage often, right? Yes. Ivanka nodded. See, this is the crux of the problem. Acting is the same as singing. You'll be nervous the first time. Try a few more times and slowly get used to it. Then, Ivanka finally raised her head and blinked her beautiful eyes. She asked, Mr. Williams, why was I nervous just now? I clearly told myself that this was a very easy thing to do. This. Eric suddenly hesitated. This was related to the problem of God's play. Logically speaking, acting should be a piece of cake for an 8-year-old child, because the so-called God's play was to let the adult actor's mental state return to the carefree state of a child. However, nothing was absolute. Just like the little lowly in front of him, she had already lost that state. Stuart, on the other hand, was still in that state, which was why he could easily perform according to Eric's request. However, Ivanka would be nervous. Ivanka, it's a complicated question, so I can't explain it to you right now. You won't understand even if I explain it to you. Ivanka nodded obediently and didn't ask any more questions. However, her expression wasn't as dejected as before. Mr. Donald, it's time to bury, a staff member said as he walked over. Donald Trumpland nodded and hugged his daughter. Daddy will be back soon. Stay here, okay? Okay. The little lowly nodded at her father and forced a smile. The shooting resumed. This time, the little lowly sat quietly on the side without saying anything. She just watched curiously as Eric remotely commanded the entire crew through the walkie-talkie. Her big eyes were sparkling. After the scene in the corridor was divided into 2 parts by Eric, the shooting went much smoother. After a few NGs, the scene finally passed after 20 minutes. Donald Trumpland was also preparing to leave with his daughter. When he came, Eric didn't greet him personally because he was too busy. He didn't even know that Donald had brought his daughter with him. Now that he was leaving, of course, Eric couldn't treat him lightly. After all, Donald Trumpland, as a real estate tycoon, came to make a cameo appearance and didn't even ask for a penny. Even if he had other intentions, it was still very respectful. Mr. Trumpland, thank you for coming. At the entrance of the Plaza Hotel, Eric shook hands with Donald. It's my pleasure. Donald smiled and patted his daughter's shoulder. Say goodbye to Eric. The little lowly stepped forward and stretched out her hand. Goodbye, Mr. Williams. Goodbye, Miss Trumpland. Eric waved at the little girl. Ivanka retracted her hand and looked at Eric with her big eyes. Mr. Williams, are we friends now? Eric was startled, then smiled and nodded. Of course. Then you can call me Ivanka, or like Daddy, Mommy and brother call me Annie. I'll also call you Eric, okay? Of course. Eric nodded again. Eric, maybe Ivanka stuttered, and then looked at her father. Daddy, can I invite Eric to our house? Donald Topland wanted to hug his daughter and kiss her hard. She was such a sweet little girl. He had gone through so much trouble today just to establish a personal relationship with Eric. Originally, he didn't know how to ask. He planned to hold some parties at home in a few days and try to invite Eric. He didn't expect his daughter to solve the problem for him. Of course, although he was happy, Donald Trumpland didn't show it on the surface. He only said to his daughter, "Of course, you're also a member of our family. You have the right to invite guests. Then Eric, come to my house when you're free." The little lowly looked at Eric expectantly. "I will," Eric said politely and didn't take it to heart. He completely took the little lowly's words as a child's babble. Maybe Ivanka would forget it in a few days. Watching the father and daughter leave, he returned to the set. Mr. Williams, this is the first draft of the script for the first 5 episodes sent by the writing team of The X-Files. Also, Fox is urging you again. They hope you can cut the trailer for Home Alone 2 as soon as possible. They plan to release it on TV before October 17th. Also, Mr. Robert Shea said that a few documents will be sent over tonight. Eric flipped through the script of The X-Files in his hand and listened to Alan read the memo next to him. After a while, Alan closed the memo. That's all. By the way, Royce just called from Central Park and said that the crew also ran into some trouble when they were preparing for the outdoor shoot there. Eric immediately raised his head. Home Alone 2 was the most important thing at the moment. What happened? It's like this. An environmental protection organization in New York doesn't allow us to use artificial snow on a large scale. They even specially organized some people to come over and supervise. Royce said that these people even had a small conflict with our crew just now. Eric didn't quite understand. How did artificial snow have anything to do with an environmental protection organization? Well, do you know what's going on? Eric asked. Although these should be the concerns of the producers, Eric was also one of the producers, even though he was the director. Moreover, in the end, he had the most power in the crew, so when something bigger happened, he was the one who had to step in the end. Since there had already been a conflict, it seemed that this matter wouldn't be resolved easily, so Eric took it more seriously. When he asked this question, Eric had already gotten up to get his jacket, planning to go to the scene personally. Alan caught up and said with concern, "Eric, it's not easy to take a break in the morning. I think Mr. Hansen will definitely take care of those things. You should rest well." "It's fine. I won't be at ease if I don't see it with my own eyes." Eric shook his head. Alan had no choice but to get in the car with Eric and rush to Central Park. On the way, Alan explained to Eric, "Here's the thing. There are two kinds of artificial snow. One is to use a snow machine to create real snowflakes, but that's too expensive and has harsh environmental requirements. It requires a temperature below zero, which is definitely impossible to achieve in this climate. Therefore, we use another method, which is to replace it with snow-like materials. The chemical composition of this artificial snow is magnesium sulfate heptahydrate. Magnesium sulfate is actually harmless and can even be used as fertilizer for many plants. However, the Environmental Protection Organization didn't listen to our explanation and didn't trust our guarantee that we would clean it up after the event. They just repeatedly restricted our use of this kind of thing. As I said just now, one of the field staff couldn't help but have a conflict with the other party. That's what happened. The field staff felt that the other party was too picky and young, so they made a move. Eric, who was leaning on the back of the car seat and listening patiently, blinked and asked, "It didn't get out of hand, did it?" "No, the two of them were pulled apart as soon as they came into contact." Alan shook his head. Eric breathed a sigh of relief and then asked, "What about the media?" "What?" Eric repeated. "I mean, is there any media attention on this matter?" Alan heard Eric's solemn tone and quickly understood something. However, he didn't answer for a moment. "I'm not too sure about this. I thought this was just a pure environmental incident. After all, many crews have encountered such entanglements." Eric took a deep breath and said to the driver in the front row, "Brute, drive faster." Arriving at the Central Park, Eric made his way through the blockade and saw 7 or 8 young men and women lying on the ground. All of them wore masks on their faces. However, they were wearing very cool clothes. Various environmental protection slogans were painted on their exposed skin using green paint. Several crew members whom Eric was familiar with stood helplessly outside. As for Jeffrey, he was discussing something with a woman who appeared to be in her 30s. She was dressed like the young men lying on the ground. There was an excited look on her face. "Miss Schneider, how many times have I told you? This place must be covered with fake snow, because this is a very important scene. Without snow it will not do. We have already made a lot of compromises. What else do you want?" "Absolutely not, Mr. Hansen. If those chemicals are placed directly on top of the vegetation, it will cause fatal damage to them. I have already promised you repeatedly that after we are done with the filming, we will clean up this place. For that, I have even bought a special vacuum cleaner. Is that not enough?" Miss Schneider shook her head again and said no. "At any rate, it is absolutely not possible. Central Park is the lungs of Manhattan. If a piece of your lung were to rot, Mr. Hansen, how would you feel? What do I have to say in order for you to agree? We will never agree to that. We will never allow fake snow to be laid on this lawn." Miss Schneider seemed to be agitated as well. As the two of them were arguing, Eric walked over. Jeffrey happened to be facing Eric. Thus, he was unaware of the situation. However, for some unknown reason, Miss Schneider was able to recognize Eric at a glance. With a serious expression, she walked over to Eric and said, "Mr. Williams, I am Shirley Schneider from the New York Green Environmental Protection Organization. I am strongly protesting against your crew's action of covering the lawn with chemicals. You must change this setting." Jeffrey also walked over to Eric's side. He helplessly glanced at the woman before saying to Eric, "I am sorry, Eric. Perhaps our afternoon filming here will have to be postponed." "No problem." Eric patted Jeffrey's shoulder. Then he said to the woman in front of him, "Miss Schneider, right? I heard some of your argument earlier. Then, I would like to ask you first. Do you know the composition of the artificial snow we are using?" Shirley Schneider sneered and said, "Of course I do. It is magnesium sulfate heptahydrate." "What else?" Eric asked. Shirley Schneider was stunned and asked, "What else?" Eric said, "Don't you know that magnesium sulfate heptahydrate is not only harmless to plants, it is also a type of fertilizer. Thus, by laying down fake snow, not only will it not harm these plants, it will even be beneficial." Shirley Schneider's expression changed several times. Then she quickly said, "I don't know what you are talking about for now. I will go back and collect some information. However, even if it is a type of fertilizer, by laying down such a thick layer, you must have used too much. I know that using anything in excess will have the opposite effect." "I have already said that after filming, we will definitely clean up carefully," Jeffrey interjected. "I don't believe you. You are a bunch of profit-seeking capitalists. Who knows if you will say one thing and do another? So if you want to lay it down." Shirley Schneider pointed at the men and women scattered all over the lawn and said, "Then lay it down on us." Eric glanced at the lawn a few times, and a thought quickly came to his mind. Chapter 250. "Miss Schneider, as long as we don't put fake snow directly on the lawn, it'll be fine?" Shirley Schneider saw that Eric seemed to have thought of something. She looked a little hesitant, but she quickly said, "Yes, you can put it on the roadside, but definitely not on the lawn. And the fake snow on both sides of the road must be properly cleaned after the shooting." Eric kept staring at the woman in front of him as he spoke. Seeing the struggle in her eyes, he was even more certain of his conjecture. If she was purely doing it for the sake of environmental protection, then she wouldn't show any hesitation when he proposed a feasible solution. Although he understood this in his heart, Eric still said in a negotiating tone, "Okay, then if we put a layer of plastic on the lawn and put fake snow on it, that should be fine, right?" Shirley Schneider was stunned for a moment before she reluctantly nodded and said, "I think, maybe it's fine." "Then let's do it." After Eric said this, he didn't pay any more attention to the woman. Eric gave Jeffrey a look, and the two walked a little further away. Then he said to Jeffrey, "Jeffrey, pause the shooting in Central Park. Immediately get everyone to prepare for the next scene. My next scene should be the one where Kevin escapes from the Plaza Hotel and is caught by two stupid thieves in the back alley. Get someone to set up the scene there. We can't stop shooting in the afternoon." Jeffrey also saw something unusual in Shirley Schneider's expression. He said to Eric, "Eric, the headquarters of News Corporation is in New York. They must have deep connections in the local area. Do you want to contact Rupert Murdoch? If we go to Rupert Murdoch for help, what will he think of us? What's more, Rupert Murdoch is not a philanthropist." Eric shook his head and said also, "Home Alone 2 also involves the interests of Fox. If we can't solve this problem in the end, Fox will definitely take the initiative to take action. We don't have to take the initiative to do them a favor." Jeffrey smiled and said, "You're so thoughtful. Then I'll get someone to buy the plastic film. But I don't think it will take long. We don't need to change the scene at all." Eric pointed to the men and women lying on the lawn and said, "With these people here today, we can forget about shooting. I'm worried that they will deliberately create conflicts, just like what happened when I wasn't here. Once something happens, it will be even more troublesome to solve it. So let's change the scene temporarily. By the way, did the media reporters just come?" Jeffrey didn't expect Eric to ask such a question. After thinking for a while, he said, "There seemed to be a few, but they just took some photos from afar." After being chased away by our staff, they left obediently. Looks like the trouble has just begun. Eric muttered and said to Jeffrey, "Make the arrangements first, and then come back to the hotel with me. I think you have more important things to do in the afternoon." "Okay then." Jeffrey nodded and hurried to carry out Eric's instructions. After Jeffrey left, Eric asked the staff for a camera and took some photos of the protesters lying on the lawn. Then, he asked Alan to immediately take them and print them. After nearly an hour, Jeffrey returned to the hotel where the crew was staying. Eric handed him a stack of photos. "What is this for?" Jeffrey picked it up and looked at it in confusion. He raised his head and asked. "Just in case," Eric said. "Didn't you notice that the purpose of this so-called Environmental Protection Organization's sudden appearance is not simple? We've filmed a few scenes in some vegetated sections before, but we haven't seen these people. But in the last week, they appeared when we were filming in Central Park." Jeffrey heard Eric's words and quickly understood. It was obvious that someone wanted to delay the filming of The Brat 2. Moreover, compared to intervening at the beginning, it was more troublesome to appear at the most critical moment. Central Park had a very important position in the hearts of New Yorkers. Therefore, if the boycott by the Environmental Protection Organization during the filming today was exposed, and people with ulterior motives deliberately fabricated facts to deliberately exaggerate the harm of the raw material for artificial snow, magnesium sulfate heptahydrate, to the vegetation in Central Park, then under the public's protest, the filming in Central Park would definitely encounter greater resistance. Even New York City had to directly intervene to stop the filming of The Brat 2, before the crew came up with a reasonable plan to appease the public's concerns. The filming schedule of The Brat 2 was calculated by the day, and it was now at the final juncture. If they were interrupted like this and delayed by a few days, then correspondingly, a lot of things that were originally planned would have to be postponed. Moreover, it was impossible to modify the script and remove the Central Park scenes because all the scenes in the early stages of filming were intertwined. There were even many scenes of Kevin running out of the Central Park exit. If they were changed, then a lot of the previously filmed material would be scrapped. If they had to reshoot, perhaps The Brat 2 would have to be delayed until Christmas. The more Jeffrey thought about it, the more worried he became. He held the photo in his hand and asked Eric, "Who do you think is causing trouble this time?" Eric picked up the movie guide that he had just bought and pointed to the movie schedule listed on the front page. The Brat 2 is scheduled for November 17th. If we delay the release because of some trouble, then it will be good for the movies that are released during this time, so we have no idea who is causing trouble. Jeffrey picked up the newspaper and looked at it. There were 7 or 8 movies released on November 17th alone, including Lethal Weapon 2, which was delayed from the summer to the Thanksgiving release in order to avoid Dark Battle, Harlem Nightclub, a Christmas comedy starring Eddie Murphy from Paramount, and Back to the Future 2 from Universal 2 days later. Eric said in a heavy tone. See, several major movie companies have movies released during this time. During Thanksgiving, the total weekly box office is about $100 million. So if The Brat 2 is delayed, the other movies will be able to share at least $30 million of the box office share that originally belonged to The Brat 2. Of course, according to the 20-80 law, the major movies you see will definitely get the most, so they are the most suspicious. But we don't have the time and energy to worry about this at the moment. Even if we find out who it is, it won't help us. The only thing we have to do is to do everything we can to finish this movie on time. Jeffrey put down the newspaper. Thinking that their opponent this time was likely to be Warner or Universal, then Firefly wouldn't have much power in front of these companies. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Then Eric, do we really not need to inform Fox?" Eric thought about it and shook his head again. "Not for the time being. Let's see how things go tomorrow. I'm sure that tomorrow's newspapers will definitely report that we used artificial snow to damage the environment of Central Park." "Then what should I do now?" Jeffrey asked. He had never encountered such a situation before. 2 things. Eric had obviously thought about it long ago. He raised 3 fingers and said, "First, Central Park is currently managed by the Central Park Preservation Committee. You can use Firefly's name to donate a sum of money to the committee. Let's make it 500,000. This will ensure that if there is a storm of public opinion, the other party will speak up for us. After saying this, Eric handed the photos to Jeffrey and said, "Second, that's it. You can contact as many local newspapers and media as possible and leak the matter of the environmental group's protest today. Ask them to help write some reports, focusing on our efforts to protect the environment of Central Park. Also, find 1 or 2 related professionals to explain in detail that magnesium sulfate heptahydrate doesn't cause harm to vegetation and is even a chemical fertilizer." "Eric, is 500,000 too much?" Jeffrey asked weakly. He was still reluctant to give away such a sum of money for nothing. Eric facebombed and said seriously, "Jeffrey, you have to understand the current situation. Once things change and the kid in charge too can't be completed on time, it won't just be a loss of $500,000. Also, the kid in charge 2's original budget of $25 million is estimated to have some surplus, so the $500,000 will be included in the production cost." Jeffrey finally nodded. "Okay, I understand. Also, because of the sudden change in the shooting plan, the afternoon shooting may be delayed by an hour. After all, we have to communicate with the relevant streets." "I got it. I'll personally make the arrangements later. You can go about your business." Jeffrey picked up the photos taken by Eric and left in a hurry. Perhaps it was because they wanted to put on a show, but during the afternoon shooting, the members of the environmental group followed them again. Although they still pointed at the crew's action of laying artificial snow, and even provoked them from time to time, they no longer forced themselves to lie on the ground and stop the crew from shooting like they did in Central Park. Eric also issued a stern warning to the crew at noon. No matter how these people provoked them, they must not fight with them because doing so would be falling into their trap. Chapter 251. Jeffrey was busy until 8 o'clock in the evening when he finally finished everything Eric asked him to do. However, because he was still worried, Jeffrey tossed and turned all night without sleeping well. Early the next morning, when the sky was just bright, Jeffrey got up with faint dark circles under his eyes. He washed up and went to the street to buy a lot of newspapers. He stood next to the newsstand and began to read eagerly. Sure enough, things were as Eric expected. In a Manhattan Morning Post, a photo of the members of the Environmental Protection Organization lying on the lawn was published in a very conspicuous position. The quality of the photo was not as clear as the photos that Eric specially took. It was obviously taken by the reporters that were chased away by the crew yesterday. What gave Jeffrey a headache was that this tabloid also published a photo of the crew and the members of the Environmental Protection Organization pushing each other. The paparazzi took the photo quite cleverly. Although the expressions of the two people in the photo couldn't be seen clearly, one of the crew members raised his foot to kick the member of the Environmental Protection Organization, and the protester seemed to be retreating in a hurry. Yesterday, the Home Alone sequel that was being shot in Manhattan's Central Park was obstructed by the famous Environmental Protection Organization JPO. As soon as he read the first sentence, Jeffrey couldn't help but curse. He negotiated with the so-called Environmental Protection Organization for so long yesterday, but he didn't know what the other party was called. In the end, the tabloid revealed the origin of these people in the first sentence. This was obviously planned. Although he was angry, Jeffrey continued to read. It is said that because the sequel story of Home Alone still takes place on Christmas Day, the Home Alone crew planned to cover the vegetation in Central Park with a chemical similar to snow called magnesium sulfate heptahydrate. This substance will cause great damage to the plants in Central Park. In order to stop the inappropriate behavior of the Home Alone 2 crew, the members of JPO negotiated with the production crew for a long time. They were even met with punches and kicks from the other crew members. They had no choice but to lie on the lawn and protest. As for the reporters who went to interview them, they were also forcefully chased away by the crew of Home Alone 2. The members of the JPO organization revealed to us that they were alone. Although the crew of Home Alone 2 temporarily stopped filming due to their strong protest, they obviously wouldn't let it go. Central Park was known as the lung of Manhattan. The reason why Manhattan residents could enjoy fresher air than other parts of New York every day was inseparable from the purification effect of Central Park's vegetation. Therefore, we call on the people of Manhattan to pay attention to the progress of this matter. At the same time, we strongly recommend that the Manhattan government intervene in this matter and stop the crew of Home Alone 2 from destroying the environment. Jeffrey felt chills all over his body after reading the article, because the last paragraph of the article was completely inciting the residents of Manhattan to unite together to protest the filming in Central Park. If the Manhattan government couldn't withstand the pressure of public opinion and intervened, then perhaps Home Alone 2 would have to wait until a real snow fell in New York before filming could continue. Who knew how long that would take? And if there was no snow, then the scenes in Central Park would be out of place compared to the scenes with snow that had already been filmed in other places. After reading this article, Jeffrey wasn't in the mood to read other newspapers. He directly found the ones he did PR yesterday. Fortunately, the New York Daily, New York Post, New York News and several other newspapers all reported fairly according to Jeffrey's PR yesterday. Because the reporters received a PR fee, their words were more biased towards the crew. At the same time, the New York Post also included an interview with a chemistry professor at New York University. Of course, this was also arranged by Jeffrey. The professor introduced the substance magnesium sulfate heptahydrate used for artificial snow in detail and objectively. He said that as long as this substance wasn't used in large amounts, not only would it not cause harm to plants, it would also promote growth. After quickly reading the newspapers, Jeffrey hurried to the hotel. Knock, knock, knock. He hurriedly knocked on Eric's door a few times. After a while, the door opened slightly, revealing a blonde beauty in a nightgown. Jeffrey was stunned. He didn't know this woman. In his heart, he thought that the ridiculous guy Eric couldn't take it because Nicole left the crew and went looking for sex. The blonde beauty saw Jeffrey clearly and quickly opened the door. "Mr. Hansen, please come in. Eric is taking a shower." Hearing the blonde woman call his name, Jeffrey relaxed a little. It wasn't sex, but at least it was easier for people to accept. The blonde beauty also quickly noticed Jeffrey's puzzled look and quickly introduced herself. "Mr. Hansen, my name is Lily Zimmerman. I play a small role in the movie, but maybe you didn't notice me." Jeffrey nodded. He opened his mouth a few times, but in the end he only pointed at the girl's collar. The blonde girl lowered her head to take a look, and immediately let out a soft cry. The girl's neck was full of faint marks, which were very conspicuous against her skin. Lily Zimmerman panicked and tightened her collar. She didn't know what to say. The bathroom door opened at the right time. Eric, wearing a white bathrobe, walked out of the bathroom with a towel drying his hair. Seeing Jeffrey sitting on the sofa, Eric was stunned. Then he smiled and greeted. "Hi Jeffrey, you are so early." "Yet it's indeed a little early." Jeffrey glanced at the blonde girl standing awkwardly at the side, and said meaningfully. Eric didn't mind and walked over with a smile. He hugged the girl's waist and softly kissed her cheek before saying to Jeffrey, "You know each other?" The two awkwardly nodded. Lily Zimmerman saw that Eric and the others seemed to have something to discuss and sensibly asked, "Eric, can I use the bathroom?" Eric smiled and nodded. "Of course, no problem. Go ahead." Lily Zimmerman rebuked and glared at Eric, but the corner of her eyes overflowed with a trace of clarity. She didn't have the fierce appearance of punching the two stupid thieves in the movie. Just like Donald Trump's character in the Plaza Hotel, she met the two stupid thieves twice. She first slapped Marvin, and then beat up the two stupid thieves. She was also temporarily found in New York. The crew contacted a famous model management company. Although it was only a small role, this was the Kids in Charge series after all. Even if the audience was mainly children, there were still a lot of adults watching the movie with their children. Thus, this role was not only an excellent opportunity for those models to increase their fame, but more importantly, they might be able to enter the big screen after participating in this movie. Everyone knew that, not to mention Hollywood superstars, even an A-lister's annual income was much higher than most supermodels. Thus, this small role caused a lot of competition. The assistant director in charge of casting looked at the 46 candidates sent over, and some models even personally approached him. He suddenly felt that this matter wouldn't be easy to handle. Although he had the right to cast and was very moved by some small models, those famous supermodels weren't people he could sneak up on. He also didn't dare to pick an unknown model in the face of competition from those supermodels. Thus, he cleverly pushed the matter to Eric. Eric looked at the list and didn't find any women he knew. Thus, he began to look through the thick photo album sent along with the list with great interest. Among the countless amorous photos, he quickly picked Lily Zimmerman. Although Lily Zimmerman wasn't the most famous or the most beautiful among the models, it just so happened that this blonde girl was the original actress from his previous life. Originally, Eric picked Lily Zimmerman out of the bad taste of returning to the original work. He didn't have any other intentions. However, during the shooting yesterday, Eric suddenly felt that the girl in black clothes and black leather gloves in the camera was very cool. He felt that the girl's appearance when she punched the two stupid thieves was simply too cool. After a few teasing and hints, Lily Zimmerman didn't even think about it and stuck close to him. The bathroom door closed with a click. Jeffrey pointed in the direction of the bathroom and asked, "Eric, what's going on?" Eric smiled and said, "Jeffrey, didn't you read the script? That girl who taught the two stupid thieves a lesson will have 2 scenes in Home Alone 2. 2 very coincidental scenes. I think it's very interesting." Jeffrey recalled and nodded. He opened his mouth to persuade Eric to restrain himself a little. After all, not only did he have a girlfriend now, but he also had 2 fixed lovers. Because of Nicole's scheming, Jeffrey also treated Nicole as Eric's lover. The other one was of course Virginia. However, Jeffrey quickly dismissed this idea. Eric wasn't like him after all. He was at the age where he was hot-blooded. As long as it didn't affect his business, it was fine for him to be a little playboy. After all, in his position, even if Eric himself wanted to restrain himself, there would be all kinds of women throwing themselves at him. Forget it, let's take a look at these first. I've already read them. Jeffrey pushed a stack of newspapers in front of Eric and said, "The stack on top is the newspaper I contacted yesterday. The bottom is what the people who are targeting us did." Eric first pulled out the bottom stack and flipped through it quickly. These were all about the recent controversy caused by the use of artificial snow by the crew of Home Alone 2. Although most of the articles righteously pointed at the possible environmental problems caused by the crew, as long as one wasn't an idiot, everyone could understand that the ultimate goal of the people behind the scenes was to target the movie. Chapter 252. When Lee Zimmerman came out of the bathroom after taking a shower and changing her clothes, Eric had just finished reading a newspaper. Glancing at the girl who was looking at him, Eric said, "Lee, can you go downstairs and pack 2 sets of breakfast for me and Jeffrey? Anything will do." "Oh, okay." Lee Zimmerman quickly nodded and walked out of the room with her handbag. At the same time, she breathed a sigh of relief. At least Eric didn't directly ask her to leave. "You look like you can't bear to part with him?" Jeffrey asked in a teasing tone. Eric didn't care about Jeffrey's tone at all. He smiled and said, "Of course, last night's experience was wonderful." "Okay, let's get down to business. What do you think of these reports?" Jeffrey helplessly pointed at the pile of newspapers that Eric was flipping through. Eric also put away his cynical expression and said, "If I didn't ask you to do this yesterday, then we would be completely in a passive situation today. Because ordinary people always have preconceived notions, it will be very difficult for us to defend ourselves in the future. It's not bad now. At least, the water is mixed up by us, and the public opinion won't be one-sided against us. So as long as we do all kinds of PR, there won't be a big problem. By the way, I talked to Robert on the phone last night. He will fly over in the morning to help. He must have more experience in this area than you." "Well, actually I wanted to talk to you about this, but I think you might." Eric smiled and said, "Might what? Don't tell me you want to say that I've always treated Robert as an outsider?" "Isn't that the case?" Eric denied. "Of course not. Although I do mind that he took the 15% shares. Since the 2 companies have merged, I will definitely treat him as one of us." As long as Robert doesn't start an internal conflict first, I will definitely not do it first. Jeffrey, who was already quite familiar with Eric, gave Eric a look of disdain which was rare. Your words are really unconvincing. No, I'm telling the truth, Eric retorted. Jeffrey, my goal is much bigger than you think. If I start to dispute with others over interests now, then it will be difficult for me to move forward. What's your goal? Hollywood. Jeffrey was stunned and didn't understand. He asked, What? Hollywood. Eric repeated with a young and frivolous tone. He said, I want one day when people mention the word Hollywood, the first thing they think of is not Los Angeles, not the major film companies, nor any movie stars remembered on the Walk of Fame, but me, Eric Williams. Hollywood is me, and I am Hollywood. Eric's heartfelt words sounded very infectious. Jeffrey stared and wanted to say a few words to attack Eric, but when he opened his mouth, it turned into a blessing. Then, I hope you can succeed. I definitely will, Eric nodded solemnly. So Jeffrey, my goal is so far away, and the road is so long. Do you think I will stop and fight with a partner who may help me go faster for a few bites of food? Jeffrey shook his head with a wry smile. I understand. The two briefly discussed countermeasures, and then Lee knocked on the door and walked in with a few sets of breakfast. I think I'll go back to my room to eat, Jeffrey said as he looked at the man and woman leaning against each other on the sofa. Without waiting for Eric to speak, Jeffrey directly took his breakfast and walked out. Don't worry about him, let's keep eating, Eric said when he saw the girl's expression. I'm not bothering you, right? Of course not, we've finished talking. By the way, you said last night that in addition to modeling, you're also acting in Broadway plays? Lee Zimmerman nodded. Yes, I like acting very much. By the way, Eric, I have a performance on Broadway next month. Will you come back to see it? Although the girl looked at Eric with anticipation, he could only shake his head. Sorry, Lee, after Home Alone ends, I have to rush back to Los Angeles immediately. Lee Zimmerman replied with an, oh, and lowered her head to eat the salad in front of her. Although she wanted to take the initiative to ask for some opportunities, the girl knew that if she took the initiative to ask for something from Eric, she would only get a blank check. Therefore, this kind of thing could only be initiated by Eric. If he didn't mention it from beginning to end, she couldn't complain and would just treat it as a normal ONS. After all, Lee also heard that it was Eric who chose her, a newcomer, from a group of supermodels. Whenever she thought of the expression on her roommate's face when she got the role, the girl felt proud. As a newcomer who had been in the industry for less than a year, when she heard about the opportunity, she didn't even think about fighting for it because she felt that she couldn't compete with a large group of supermodels. It was her roommate who instigated her. The two of them submitted their resumes together, and she was inexplicably selected. But at the same time, because of jealousy caused by her good luck, she and her roommate quickly became friends. These days, after listening to her roommate's sarcastic remarks, she stopped talking to her roommate and planned to move out as soon as possible. Compared to this opportunity, an unreliable friendship was nothing. What's more, that roommate of his didn't treat him as a friend wholeheartedly. He often used the fact that he entered the industry earlier than him as a senior to flatter himself. To put it bluntly, the competition between models was so fierce that it was difficult to form a true friendship, except for similar relationships. Eric sniffed the faint perfume on the girl's body, ate breakfast and asked, do you want to develop in the direction of professional acting? Rejoicing, Lee Zimmerman hurriedly nodded. Good, I'll give you another opportunity, Eric said. You should know Friends, right? Of course I know. I also know that the sitcom was written by you. I watch it every week. Perhaps it was because she heard something familiar, the girl said excitedly. I like Ross the most. I think he's the kind of perfectionist who's a fool. He's much better than his sister's perfectionist who has obsessive-compulsive disorder. And Phoebe. The girl said a few words and quickly realized that it was inappropriate. She quickly closed her mouth and looked at Eric awkwardly. Eric smiled and said, Thank you for liking this show. There's an episode of Friends, about a blackout in New York, where Chandler and a famous model are locked in the ATM lobby of a bank. It's about an episode long. I can recommend you to give it a try. According to the original script, this episode should have taken place in the 7th episode of the first season, and Chandler would have met a model from Victoria's Secret. However, Victoria's Secret wasn't famous yet, so Eric changed the girl's identity to a famous model. Also, after the script was revised, the episode was pushed back to the 20th episode, so it definitely hadn't been filmed yet. Lee couldn't help but confirm, "Really, Eric, do you think I can really do it?" Eric nodded again. In the future movies or TV series he was preparing, there would definitely be many similar roles. Rather than letting an unscrupulous casting assistant director take advantage of a small actress, he might as well use it as a favor. The current influence of Friends was much greater than the first season in his previous life. Therefore, being able to guest star in an episode was equivalent to being recognized by more than 20 million people in America. It was much better than being on the cover of a few magazines. Of course, Eric could only give Lee Zimmerman so much. Presumably, after appearing twice in a popular TV series and a blockbuster movie, it would be easy for the girl to get a few more roles. Whether or not she could go further in the future would depend on her own efforts and luck. Lee saw Eric's confident gaze and immediately pounced on him, kissing him fiercely on the face. Okay. Eric licked his face with his gentle tongue and quickly pushed the girl away. "Stop fooling around, let me finish my breakfast." After breakfast, Alan came to discuss the day's schedule with Eric as usual. After Alan finished talking, Eric pointed at the girl beside him. "Alan, contact Los Angeles. I remember that there's a model role in the 20th episode of Friends. Give it to Miss Zimmerman." Alan quickly wrote down the matter on the memo and looked at the woman beside Eric. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Eric, do you want to talk to Mr. John Jennifer Aniston directly?" Eric almost forgot about this matter. Other than Eric, the most powerful person in the Friends cast was the producer, John Jennifer Aniston. If he pushed Lee Zimmerman over, not only would John Jennifer Aniston not let the girl get the role, but she would also definitely call him and scold him. After thinking about it, Eric waved for Alan to come over and whispered in Alan's ear, "How about this? Just say that Jeffrey recommended her. He's been single for so long, and he's a little old, so it's not easy for him to pick up a girl. Tell John to worry more." The corner of Alan's mouth twitched, but he still asked, "Eric, should we inform Mr. Hansen?" "Don't worry about it, I'll tell him." Alan thought to himself, it would be strange if you were willing to tell him such a big black pot, but he just nodded helplessly, closed the memo, and left in a hurry. "Eric, I didn't expect you to be so bad." After Alan left, Lee Zimmerman glared at Eric. Although Eric whispered in Alan's ear, his voice was not so low that she couldn't hear him. "I'm just a guest star, and I won't overestimate myself and clash with your little girlfriend." Eric smiled. "If you don't say that, you won't even get the role." Lee Zimmerman didn't understand and asked, "Why didn't your Firefly invest in Friends?" "Yeah, but the producer of Friends is my little girlfriend's father." Because of Eric's arrangements in advance, public opinion didn't overwhelmingly crusade against the Kids 2 crew's bad behavior of destroying the ecological environment of Central Park. However, this incident still had a huge impact. Although there were some rational people who believed the views of the newspapers that Jeffrey had published, there were also many who believed the views of other newspapers. Therefore, in the next 2 days, there was a huge debate around whether the Kids 2 crew should continue to lay artificial snow in Central Park for filming. It even quickly spread to all parts of the country and became a hot topic. The $500,000 that Eric asked Jeffrey to donate to the Central Park Preservation Committee also played a big role. When the reporter interviewed the chairman of the Preservation Committee, Tim Frick, about whether the Kids 2 crew's filming in Central Park had a significant impact on the environment, Mr. Frick said a lot of good things for the Kids 2 crew and listed a series of measures that the crew had taken. He also said that the Kids 2 crew was a very responsible crew. Of course, Tim Frick didn't hide the fact that the committee had accepted the $500,000 donation from the crew. Otherwise, it would be even more troublesome if the media caught him. However, Tim Frick couldn't say that this was compensation for the damage that artificial snow might cause to the vegetation in the park. Otherwise, it would be tantamount to slapping himself in the face. Instead, he said that the crew saw that some of the public facilities in Central Park were relatively old, so they donated the money to let the park replace a batch of new public facilities. Because the interview with Tim Frick was broadcast during prime time, many people saw this news. Coupled with a series of public relations by the Kids 2 crew, the situation gradually became clear. In the end, the Manhattan district government issued a statement saying that they would send a special monitoring team to monitor whether the crew used artificial snow during the filming in Central Park, according to the rules that they had promised in advance. Moreover, this monitoring team would also choose a few volunteers from the public to ensure the impartiality of the monitoring team. After this statement was issued, the Kids 2 crew immediately issued a statement saying that not only would they cooperate with the monitoring team, but they were also willing to bear the expenses outside of the Manhattan district government's budget. Both sides expressed their goodwill back and forth. Coupled with News Corporation's secret efforts, the matter was finally resolved properly. The so-called Environmental Protection Organization, GEPO, didn't stop the crew from filming after that. In late October, Kids 2 successfully wrapped up filming. In addition to rushing back to Los Angeles to deal with the post-production of the two movies, the release date of Scary Island was also approaching. This was the first shot of the Firefly Thanksgiving, Christmas slot. If they could get off to a good start, then the box office of the next few movies would increase. Therefore, Eric also attached great importance to this matter. Chapter 253. The second-hand Ford made a few muffled sounds before it came to a sudden stop. Although George Rosen was wearing a seatbelt, he still felt a sharp pain in his chest when the car came to a sudden stop. George Rosen unbuckled his seatbelt and got out of the car. He lifted the hood of the car that was emitting faint smoke and took a few glances. He cursed a few words that started with F and looked around. This place was less than a kilometer away from the premiere of Island Horror. He had no choice but to use all his strength to push the car into a parking space on the roadside. He then took out a satchel with a camera and a tape recorder from the car, and rushed to the premiere of Island Horror, on foot. At this time, George Rosen no longer looked like a gentleman in a suit half a year ago. He wore an unzipped dark gray jacket and loose jeans. The stubble on his face made him look a little unkempt. Because of the storm in July that attacked Dark War, he, who was originally a little famous film critic, was not only banned by most film companies in Hollywood, but also lost his lucrative job. Although George Rosen's annual income was more than $100,000 before the accident, like most Americans, George Rosen also had the habit of spending in advance. This habit led to his complete bankruptcy within a few months after he lost his job and the public relations income of the film company. Not only was his apartment in Beverly Hills taken back by the bank, but he also had to sell his original sports car to pay off his debts. At that time, Premiere Magazine was pressured by Columbia to fire him. Therefore, some other film-related magazines in Hollywood certainly did not dare to hire him. In order to make a living, George Rosen had to find a job at a newspaper called Hollywood Online. Although the name of this newspaper sounded very high-end, it was not even comparable to The Hollywood Reporter or The Hollywood Observer. This was a tabloid, and George Rosen's current identity was a reporter for Hollywood Online. To put it bluntly, he was a paparazzi. Although George Rosen still received a monthly income of more than $3,000, including his monthly salary from Hollywood Online, and the occasional remuneration from publishing film reviews, the salary he earned every day was less than one-fifth of what he used to earn by easily publishing a few film reviews. Every time George Rosen was frustrated by the difference in his life, Nicole Kidman's pretty face would appear in his mind. If he hadn't met that despicable woman, he would still be able to live a decent and relaxed life. He wouldn't be reduced to living in a small apartment in Burbank and driving around Los Angeles like a dog every day. Most of the time, he wouldn't be able to find anything after a whole day's work. Instead, he would be scolded by that fat, pig-like chief editor. Thinking of Nicole Kidman, George Rosen naturally thought of Eric. Not long after that incident, Nicole became the female lead in Eric's new film. Although many newspapers were talking about how outstanding and lucky Nicole Kidman was, she was not the only one. There were also some newspapers that released the details of how Eric had selected the Australian girl for many auditions. But George Rosen remembered clearly what happened that night. Nicole Kidman and Drew Barrymore obviously knew each other, so it was impossible that she didn't know Eric Williams. Therefore, George Rosen once wanted to tell the media that things weren't what they saw. That woman must have some secret with Eric Williams. She must have made some dirty deals with Eric Williams to get the female lead in Sleepless in Seattle. However, he didn't have any evidence. Secondly, he had been banned not long ago for attacking Eric Williams in Dark War. Even if he told the media about it, most of the newspapers wouldn't believe it. Even if some tabloids were willing to publish it, people would think that he was slandering the young director because of his ban. At that time, he might even face the risk of being sued. Therefore, George Rosen had to bury this matter in the bottom of his heart. Recalling all that had happened in the past few months, George Rosen spent a few minutes walking to the luxurious cinema on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. The premiere of Island Horror would be held here tonight. Of course, George Rosen would no longer be able to sit comfortably in the cinema and watch movies like those invited film critics and receive a PR check afterwards. He was now not even qualified to attend the press conference after the film ended. He could only squeeze on the red carpet with many paparazzi, waiting for the director, lead, and other important figures of the film to appear, hoping to get some good news from them. If he had a choice, George Rosen would definitely not attend the premiere of the film. After all, because of his hatred for Nicole Kidman, he didn't have any good feelings for Eric. Otherwise, he wouldn't have vented his anger on Eric's Dark War, because of Nicole's teasing of him. However, it was already October 30th, and he had yet to complete his interview assignment for this month. If he couldn't submit the manuscript by tomorrow, the harsh chief editor would definitely deduct his salary. Therefore, George Rosen had no choice but to suppress his disgust and attend the premiere. It was already 6 o'clock in the evening, and the red carpet in front of the cinema was packed with people on both sides. Harrison Ford, Tom Hanks, Kim Basinger, Melanie Griffith, Julia Roberts, one by one, Hollywood stars appeared on the red carpet, causing screams from the fans. George Rosen, like the other paparazzi who were blocked outside the cordon, shouted at the top of his lungs at the stars walking calmly on the red carpet, hoping that they would answer a few of their questions while posing for photos. However, they were destined to get no response. After wasting an entire roll of film without any useful results, George Rosen cursed anxiously in his heart. He changed to a new roll of film and looked at Demi Moore, who had just walked down the red carpet intimately leaning on Bruce Willis. He hoped that the actress in the long gown would fall hard when walking up the steps. It would be best if she stepped on the edge of the gown and tore off the gown. Then, he would have a topic for his press release and could directly call it a day without having to endure the crowd and noise here. Unfortunately, this beautiful wish was destined to not be fulfilled by any passing angel. Demi Moore and her husband, Bruce Willis, quickly walked up the steps and into the cinema. As soon as the two of them disappeared from view, the cheers and screams of the onlookers could be heard from the other end of the red carpet. George Rosen carefully distinguished the crowd. When he heard the name Eric Williams, he couldn't help but feel a strong sense of disgust in his heart. However, the experience in the past few months had worn him down completely, so George Rosen quickly cheered up like the other paparazzi around him, hoping to stop Eric Williams to answer a few questions. Eric Williams' figure appeared around the corner, wearing a decent black suit with a faint smile on his face. He waved at the fans on both sides from time to time. The petite woman holding Eric's arm and walking over with him was Virginia Madsen, the female lead of Horror Island. When they were still 7 or 8 meters away, the paparazzi shouted at Eric frantically, "Eric, can you stop and take a photo? Eric, look here, look here." Eric held Virginia's arm and walked to the press area. He stopped at the right time and let go of Virginia, allowing the girl to pose freely for photos. This would be a good way to promote Virginia's reputation. "Eric, can you take a photo with Ms. Madsen?" "Eric." The paparazzi were not satisfied and shouted again. Eric, who was standing on the red carpet, shook his head with a smile. Even though many people were aware of his relationship with Virginia, and many tabloids were brazenly fabricating rumors about them, Eric wouldn't take the initiative to provide material for these people. After a moment of clicking, the clever paparazzi knew that Eric was about to leave, so they quickly reached out their tape recorders to Eric. However, no matter how these people asked, Eric acted as if he did not hear them. He stretched out his arm like a gentleman and held Virginia's arm, intending to walk into the theater. Seeing that such a great opportunity was missed again, George Rosen had an idea and shouted, "Mr. Williams, don't you think that it's very stupid to release Terror of an Island on November 1st? Because he used all his strength, George Rosen's voice instantly suppressed everyone's. Eric stopped and turned his head to look for George Rosen. Soon he locked onto George Rosen. Although he knew the name of the film critic who wrote the film review to Attack Dark War, Eric had never seen him in person. Therefore, Eric's eyes showed a look of interest at this time. Seeing that Eric stopped, the paparazzi behind the cordon went crazy again, and the shutter sounds were heard crazily. Eric let go of Virginia and walked a few steps to George Rosen and said, "Were you talking just now?" "Yes." George Rosen nodded slightly. Although Eric was young, he did not lack the aura of a successful person. George Rosen could not help but feel a little guilty because of what he had done before. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.